Right, good afternoon, members. It's 2 o'clock, so I'll start this afternoon's meeting of Audit, Governance and Accounts Committee. We'll start off by reminding us of the fire evacuation procedures, which means essentially we have no alarms scheduled. And in the event of a fire alarm going off, we're to leave by the nearest available exit, at either end of the committee room, and congregate in the entrance to War Memorial Park. I remind you all that the meeting is being webcast. Might have to put my teeth in at some point today. To receive apologies for absence, I have apologies from Councillor Gurdon and Councillor Putty. No one else at the moment? Nope. Resignations and replacements. I have a rush of excitement, but I think it's Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I'm replacing Councillor Eyre for this meeting.
Thank you. Was there any other? No, thank you. Declarations of conflict of interest. Councillor Leek, then Councillor Keating.
My son works for PricewaterhouseCoopers in Frankfurt.
Thank you. Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. I need to declare an interest in relation to any discussion in terms of Councillor Reid, mentioned in the papers. He and I are currently opponents in an existing election period, and I will not participate in relation to himself at this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, that's very clear, and we appreciate you notifying of that. Nothing else? Okay, urgent items, I have none. To confirm the minutes, we have two sets of minutes outstanding, the one from the 17th of December and the one from 18th of February. So if we start with last year's 17th of December, these were held over last time subject to some amendment. You'll have had the opportunity to review them. For the ones for the 17th of December, do I have any further comments, or are you happy that I sign them off as a record of the meeting? Yep, thank you. In relation to the 18th of February, our last meeting, do I have any comments in respect of those? Councillor Leek.
Well, in respect of little note 1 on the first page, I sought advice from Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council rather than before Christ and
Thank you, yes.
and I'm not sure. I think I did ask you, Chairman, whether I really did put question 2 as reported there, and you were going to ask officers. I think I suggested that the question that he asked he withdrew the following day, because I read that in the press. But I'll leave it as it is.
Yeah, I think all we would need to report was the question was asked and it was subsequently responded to, and that was probably sufficient for the minutes, if that's okay. Okay. Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. I'm asking at this point for a change of process which will help any readers of the minutes in the future. To say that we have a member on public participation and to identify them is legitimate and it's proper. But to identify the subject matter by an oblique reference to paper D or item 12 doesn't enable any member of the public to get any idea of what the subject matter is, and I think it would help enormously if half a line or a line of explanation against the public participation would be useful.
What do we think, members? Because it's an opportune time to do that, as we're about to be trialling a new mint keeping process next month. So, yes, yeah, simple one-liner. Okay, thank you, helpful. Okay, so I'll sign off both copies of the minutes with the minor change to the typo on the ones for the 18th of February. Member and public... Member and public participation on today's agenda items, I have none notified, and I can't see anybody here. Referrals from other committees of the council, I have none. And issues referred by the cabinet, I have none. That takes me through to item 11. As members, last time we were a little vexed by the wording of this agenda item, so I'm just going to read this through so that we're all comfortable. Use of Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000, affectionately known as REPA. I have no notifications, which means the committee is requested to note that since the last meeting of the Audit, Governance and Accounts Committee, there have been no requests or authorisations granted under this Act and these powers. So that includes directed surveillance, covert human intelligence source, or urgent oral approvals. Are members content? Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. The one area that had been brought to my attention by outside events has been that some councils actually outsource this particular type of activity. And I would like clarification as to whether, if the process of outsourcing would be able to be reported in this particular way. We're currently talking effectively about internal people doing things and reporting to us, and that's legitimate, and it is right and proper that the process that we've identified is accurate, and I have no difficulty with that. But if we outsource it, I don't know. If we do outsource it, would the existing continuation of the rules and the reporting thereof apply?
Right, so can I just,
Thank you.
for my sense, check what I think you're asking. In terms of use of this power, do we ask someone else to use this power on our behalf, i.e. outsource that to a third party? And if we do, would that then be captured by the same authorisations? Okay. Help.
Thank you, Chairman. The controlling mind for a RIPA authorisation is this council's. So if we were wishing to contract somebody to undertake the surveillance for us, then we would still need to do the authorisation in-house. So that bit doesn't. We don't lose that statutory. We don't lose that power. So it still retains in-house.
And does anybody currently exercise these powers on our behalf, as far as I'm... Councillor Keating?
I'm assuming that an individual item outsourced would be captured, but there is a potential for the whole process to be outsourced. Would this answer still apply in those circumstances? Thank you.
Yeah, I would have thought so, because again, the accountable body is still the council. It's the same way as if we outsourced a finance function, we would still need to retain the Section 151 responsibilities, because that's a statutory responsibility passed to the authority. So it still comes back to, as Mrs. Taylor said, that the controlling mind would be ours, and we would have to demonstrate that it was being duly exercised by a third party under the power or the authorisation that we grant. But I don't know, do you have a particular reference? Because as far as I'm concerned, we are talking theoretically here, and that seems to work. But no, for this council, we're talking theoretically. If there's a particular circumstance you have reference of, or example you wish to check, then perhaps if you could give us some guidance on that, we can take it away.
Thank you, Chair. I do not have an individual case in relation to BDBC, but I am aware of other cases in other councils where the whole process of the use of regulatory powers has been outsourced. And I don't want to get to the point where I'm looking backwards. I want to look forwards and say, if the use of investigation of regulatory powers is outsourced, will we continue to have the level of reporting and the clarity which we currently have, because I welcome that. Thank you.
Okay,
And I would welcome the actual officer providing the answer. Thank you.
I was going to say, can I suggest the best way of dealing with that is if you're able to provide outside of this meeting, some of the examples of other authorities that do that, then maybe through a simple phone call, we can actually talk to one or two other authorities and ask how they perceive their powers to have been transferred, because I suspect they'll be in the same position. Would that help? Yeah, please.
I don't wish to prolong or develop this in any great sense. It seems to me that the simple answer is the use of the regulatory powers on behalf of this borough will always be reported and should always be reported via this mechanism. And that simple and the confirmation of that would be sufficient for my needs at the moment. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's what was said, but I can ask Mrs. Taylor to confirm that again if you wish.
Each council is obliged to nominate officers who have the final sign-off for RIPA. And for this council, that's your senior management team. So I do that. We do not outsource any of the surveillance work, so we don't employ people to, do any of that covert work. And all of our authorisations come through this council. If we were going to be in an outsourcing situation, then if we were minded to change that for some good reason, then that would have to be done through a necessary delegation. But I don't actually believe we could outsource the actual decision to issue the RIPA. But in a shared service arrangement, for instance, then it may be that the nominated council, the nominated officer from the other council, could be the RIPA officer. But these are complexities that actually don't exist. They don't exist here. It's a completely in-house delivery, processing and delivery.
Have you got something to add to that?
Thank you, Chair. Just for clarification, the authorisation of RIPA is actually carried out by Magistrates Court now. So we can't authorise internally. So anything would need to go to Magistrates Court. And again, I'm sure it'd be brought back to committee as you requested.
Thank you, that was helpful. Okay, I think that takes us to item 12, implementation of the Independent Governance Report, and brings it to paper B, please. And I think you're going to give us a brief... Sorry. Right, okay, I'm going to start again in a minute. Yes, would you like to do that for us, Mrs. Taylor?
It's just a brief paper, members. We talked last time around the action plan, which you agreed, and I said I would bring back an update paper. And members, I am merely being efficient here. There is no need to write a wraparound report to this. You can see a table, and I will do a progress update on every meeting. And as you can see, if there are papers on this agenda that apply to this action plan, then I've referenced that in the action plan. So today you have some information from our Deputy Monitoring Officer on Code of Conduct to consider, and also the many down financial model.
Any questions, members? Councillor Gardner?
Thank you. Review of the calling process and the scrutiny function was due to start in late February, but is still not started. Can you let us know when it is due to start?
Thank you, through you, Chair. I've made some preliminary inquiries around supporting the council to consider what it would want from its scrutiny function. In fairness, Constitutional Working Party have been taken up with the matters of Code of Conduct. Councillor Harvey's asked me for an update on scrutiny, and I quite honestly said I'll get to it. So it's on my to-do list. But on the priorities that you issued, this was the next one you wanted to have a look at around scrutiny and calling. So we'll be on that. Should we be able to clear the legal advice, may I suggest?
Okay, Councillor Leake.
Can I just ask about minutes? I mean, it says in progress, and it says plan date to commence May 2. Is that the new type of minutes, or? I mean, are we going to be able to comment on the revised format?
Through you, Chair. Yes, certainly. In fact, members asked for a paper to come back to this committee to see the proposed way forward, and I haven't been able to do that for you this time. What we've done so far is that the team have been briefed and received some additional support from an external colleague around creating a more fulsome type of minutes, which I think is what members would want, and I would absolutely agree what you described there, Councillor Keating, would feature in the new style minute. I think, and the team are currently doing shadow minutes in the new style because we need to look at the level of resources for that new style, because it takes a lot longer to take a longhand note of the meeting and then write a paragraph than actually the action points. So we've got the team up and working on the new style. They're currently doing shadow minutes for this cycle. I'm checking that, I'm sense checking that for against best practice, and some members of ARGA who came to a private meeting know that I was looking for councils of best practice to have a look at what minutes look like. And then ideally the new way will start on that first cycle in May. My intention, members, was to drop you all a note to say this is what the new style looks like, and I think let's have a look at it, and then you can certainly comment on it at that point.
Yeah, and if I recall, that is what we agreed, that we would try and do this expeditiously without necessarily bringing it through the meeting if we could. But Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry I'm late. I was rather delayed by the time it took to read Brian's messages. I'm reading the papers. I may be late with this question because it's probably been answered before, but is it the intention this work covers regulatory committees or only Ofcom?
Were you in that meeting? My colleague has looked at. We first focused on both. Well, we looked at the Ofcom minutes to start with, and then we looked at cabinet meetings. And I have now asked him to look at regulatory minutes because our regulatory minutes are unique in the way that we have a minute and then we have an appendix. And I'm currently checking as to whether more should be integrated into the minutes. So the short answer is yes, it is. So we do need to have a look at that as well. And similarly, the resources for regulatory minutes are different. Our committee services team don't actually support those meetings, and it's a question of whether we need to relook, and if we're doing a more unified approach, whether we need to bring those resources together. So the short answer is yes, we do need to look at regulatory minutes.
I'm chairing a regulatory committee on Wednesday, and I think it might be helpful if I ask them outside of the agenda just briefly for any comments they may have about their minutes. It seems to me probably inappropriate that what members say in discussion of a regulatory matter should start to be recorded in any detail. Members can, of course, comment, ask for comments. We often do add comments regarding a matter which we want officers to follow up on, and that is recorded in minutes. I'll get back to you, if I may, about that particular committee.
Councillor Harvey.
Just quickly, really to echo Horace's point, because I think the idea of having full minutes is important. The issue with the regulatory committees for me, I guess, and thinking of Horace's committee in particular in terms of planning, would be a legal eye looking back upon a set of minutes sat in an appeal. Do we then use the members' words against them? And I think how you capture what would be an appropriate minute of a decision of the committee is one thing. Capturing the view of a maybe a generality is one thing, but specific comments that members make, I would be wary of in a regulatory setting. However, the flip side to that is if you say something in committee, on the mic, in committee, then you should have to stand by it. So there is a flip side to it, and that one raises the question of the members who sit on those committees with the support they get to approach them in the way they should approach a regulatory committee, being aware of what they're saying in those meetings, which again raises a completely different issue of training and support.
Yeah, I think it's not an easy one. Yeah, so I think there's a reference there. In terms of the Ofcom minutes, they are the ones that will be looked at through the process next month. and we'll start to see a change in that minute taking. And I think it's a fair point in terms of regulatory minute taking. We need to look at that separately because of the different obligations that go with those minutes. And yes, that then leads into other issues in terms of member awareness and training. Any other questions on those, members? Or are we happy with paper B? So literally just need to pick up on the call-in scrutiny to be scheduled once the existing Constitutional Working Party workload is lessened, and then to look at the minutes of regulatory once we've dealt with the Ofcom ones. Okay. Councillor Mitchell did remind me of one other thing which I'd promised Councillor Gurdon at the start and then completely forgot about, which is I did receive comments from Councillor Gurdon along with his apologies for this meeting in respect of the late arrival of hard copy papers and the volume of papers for this meeting. Certainly I pointed out that the minutes were available online within the required timeline, but again, for those who rely on hard copy papers, then they didn't actually come out till within the 7 days, yes. So do we have any update on where we are with those, whether there's any particular reason for that, or was it simply a virtue of the bank holiday?
Regrettably, Councillor Chair, yes, I mean, we try to get them out as quickly as possible. It is unusually large agenda this time, but it was unfortunately just the quirk of the bank holiday dates that they weren't dispatched until the Tuesday.
Thank you. I probably will report back to Councillor Gurdon as well generally about the comment also made on the Monday-Thursday meeting, when we've got meetings scheduled either side of a bank holiday that impact on these sorts of schedules to get paper out. We just need to look at that in the way we schedule our meetings going forward. Councillor Leake, you think about it?
So I was going to say exactly that, and it's not a quirk, as Easter was fixed. I think when the moon first came up, or something like that. So really it just needs a little planning, and I actually also complained because mine didn't come until the day after Councillor Gurdon had received them, and it's just wholly unacceptable, and I'm not prepared to read 300 pages on my computer. My sight isn't that good.
So, well, thank you for your indulgence. Thank you for your indulgence taking that matter there, but it was important to reflect that we had issue with the papers this time round, and clearly Easter. So there we go. Well, we didn't have issues with Easter, but such is life, right? Okay, so if that's item 12 sorted out, and now I'm going to go back to Paul Gundry and ask him to introduce paper C, please.
Thank you, Chair. I bring to the committee my internal audit annual plan for 13-14 years I do each year, and there are 3 documents which I'd like the committee to approve. The first one is the internal audit terms of reference for 13-14, and that can be found on page 20 to 27 of 303. The only change to that document from last year, the report that you approved last year, is the date to reflect a new financial year. Moving on to the audit strategy, which can be found on page 28 to 37 of 303. So audit strategy is page 28 to 37. I have listed the changes I've made in paragraph 5.2, and that can be found on page 18 of 303. If the committee want me to run through those changes, I'm happy to do so, but the contents in the paragraph of the report. Sorry.
No, we had amendment to the stewardship team. Obviously, the changing the contingency days available for the year. I hope that the committee are interested in paragraph 5.3 of the report, which is found on page 35. And this relates to timescales that we're expecting recommendations to be implemented in. So, for example, you've got fundamental recommendations we expect to be completed within 1 month of the final report. And obviously significant for 3 months and merits attention for 3 months. So I hope that's something that the audit committee will definitely approve. And the last change is in terms of the distribution of my final audit reports, final audit reports, they will all go to the relevant strategic leadership team member. So, for example, if it's a report within Kevin Jaquest's business unit, the copy of the report will go to the chief exec. So the whole of the authority now understanding
where we're doing well and what improvements need to be made through the audit cycle. And my third document is my internal audit plan, which can be found on page 38 and 39 of page 303 pages. And that's a list of the audit assignments that I'll be carrying out this year. So over to the committee for any questions. Thank you.
Okay, can I take each of the papers separately, because I think that would help. So can I take first of all the audit strategy? And do I have any questions on the audit strategy, please? Terms of reference. No, the terms of reference. Sorry, it's my fault. It's the terms of reference, which is at page 20 of 303. Please.
Page 15 of 303 is the internal audit plan. That's the first of the papers, isn't it?
Councillor Keaton, if you put
Sorry.
So that's the name of the report, the paper. So we've got, there are 3 appendices. Appendix A is the terms of reference. Yeah.
Sorry, you have questions on the officer report? Yes, the officer report.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question in relation to page 18. Two-thirds of the way down the page, it said the previous membership of the leadership team or whatever it was, section 151 has now been taken out. Right? Now, is that a downgrading of the team?
No, sorry, Chair. The head of resources is still in the stewardship team, and apologise, I should have maybe put in brackets by the side of heads of resources, section 151 officer. So he is in.
No, that was your question on the first papers, and that's sorted. Sorry. Thank you for drawing that to attention. Thank you. Were there any other questions on the officer report? And I skimmed over that because it is literally an introduction to the other 3 papers, but I appreciate the clarification. Okay, so can we look at the terms of reference next, please? Councillor Keating?
Thank you, Chair. I have a question in relation to page 23. It's item 4. And it's relation to the last word on that first line. Accordingly, in the conducted planned audit, internal audit may review. Right? May appraise, etc. May review. Now, the word may is very permissive. It's not instruction. It doesn't give instruction, and it doesn't require the totality of those issues to be considered. And I would have thought that the issues raised in item 4 ought to be considered, not may be considered. So I would love to see the word will changed from may to will. Thank you.
That change will be made.
Any other? Councillor Keaton, you have another question?
Obviously a different question, Chair. It's on page 24 under item 5B. It says risk management, internal audit has a role, and I'm sure it does, and it should. The question I wanted to ask the internal audit manager is, where do the reports, when you've done your analysis of the risk, go to? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of risk with my audit plan is carried out on a risk assessment basis, and as you'll see in Appendix C, that is the subject areas I want to audit this year. That is based on risk assessment, so I'm bringing that to you today. In terms of the risk management process, as you're aware from the November meeting, I am now responsible for the risk management process, and I'm currently reviewing that process, and we're bringing a revised process to yourselves, risk management, in June.
Could I further refine my question, therefore, Chair? item 5B says it will be in relation to business units. Do you produce a business unit risk management report, and if so, to whom does it go? Thank you.
No, I don't. That's risk management is the responsibility of every manager and every person in the council. So each head of service will be responsible for reviewing their own risk. Themselves.
Do you have any other questions on the audit terms of reference? No. Okay, can we go on to the next paper, the audit strategy then, please? Councillor Leake.
On page 33, 303, we have the list of the key audits. I probably ask this question every year, but I'll ask it again. The basis on which these activities or services have been selected for this particular...
These audits have been determined by risk assessment.
Yes, but I'd still like to hear the precise...
Should we ask the officer for a response? Could you,
Yes.
if you pop your light off for me, Councillor Leake?
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair.
Deal with that in the next paper.
Go on, let the officer speak. Come on.
I carry out I have a 3-year strategic audit plan which looks at the key areas in the council I think that need to be looked at, and for 13-14 those are the audits that I'll be carrying out, and as Councillor Mitchell's pointed out, it is carried out on a risk assessment which looks at materiality, the control environment, vulnerability, the sensitivity and the management concern for the area.
That I do understand, but it doesn't tell me whether the risks are higher or whether there are other services or departments which might have an equal risk or a...
Point taken. It's an assessment I carry out and I come up with a 3-year plan. And that 3-year plan is done on a rotational basis. So over a 3-year time period, you will cover virtually all the areas in the council.
I don't understand. If you go on to the next paper, which on page 39, you've got other key audits. Well, you've got a list of core systems audits and other key audits, which are different from the other key audits in this paper. That's what I... into whether it's typed in bold or not.
I think the ones in bold, fast that one first, they're the ones that I didn't carry out last year, that I didn't bring to you last year, so that was a change in the audit plan from previous year to this year. I think I've actually made a mistake in my report on page 33, because those audits there should be those ones that are on page 39 under the other key audits. So I apologise to committee for that.
So Councillor Mitchell wasn't correct, but I was right to ask the question. Is that... Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for that helpful clarification. Can we try and avoid the subtext of the conversation at the moment, please? I know you have another question, Councillor Leake, but I had some other hands go up, and I'll come back to you in a second. I have Councillor Cubitt next.
Yes, sorry. I requested at the beginning of last year because of the fact that when I'd sought information, we couldn't access it. So that was a specific and special request. Did that audit get done last year? Because I obviously wasn't at the meeting when we discussed the fact that lots of documents have gone missing.
That report has been carried out, and the summary of that report will be coming to the June committee as part of the Q4 progress to date report. So it'll be at the next audit committee.
Brilliant. So it's been done, but we haven't received it yet, so I'm not going mad. Brilliant.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Forgive my ignorance, I was trying to get my head around page 36 and 33, sorry, 39, the lists that are in. am I right in saying that in terms of housing and what you're looking to do, where does the benefits element fit with that? Because obviously, under the other key audits, we've got a list of a few, such as bed and breakfast and the rent box scheme. But in the context of what's going on now and the changes that we're likely to see coming in, surely the logic in my head is if you're looking at housing, you're going to have to look at benefits, and if you're looking at benefits, you're going to have to look at housing, and there's going to have to be. Otherwise, we aren't doing a full job in the context of where those units are going to be.
Thank you, Chair. On page 39, where you've got the audits that are going to be carried out, you've got the two sections, the core systems and the other key audits. The core systems we carry out every year, and that's a requirement of an external auditor to place reliance on that work. And part of those audits you'll see is the housing benefits. We look at administration process, so that'll be picked up as part of that audit there.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 35, paragraph 5.3, you mentioned this in introducing it, the question of how quickly action is taken. Is there underlying that an escalation process? And if so, next time you bring this report next year, it might be useful to just mention what that escalation process is.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, there is an escalation process, and 5.8 of my report, page 36, talks you through the material weaknesses if they're not dealt with, the process for taking it to the business unit manager if he or she doesn't deal with that recommendation to the 151 officer. If they're still not dealt with, it obviously comes to audit committee.
Yes, there seemed to be an inconsistency there in that the recommendation on a fundamental thing is meant to be done within a month, and then if it's not done within 6 months, the head of service is required to attend committee, which means he'd probably come to committee after 9 months. If it's meant to be done within a month, it would seem to me that the escalation should be, and I mean, I don't think what the paragraph you're referring to really covers what I mean by escalation. Escalation to his manager or whatever.
Thank you, Chair. The reason for the difference is that we would expect a fundamental recommendation to be completed within a month, and as you know, if it's not, it will be reported to audit committee as part of the progress reports that you receive will be flagged up as an incomplete recommendation. The committee obviously have the opportunity to call the head of service to account at any time, but something was agreed with yourselves probably 2 years ago, was that you wanted to have a line in here that said at 6 months we will be calling the head of service to account. So it just gives the flexibility between the two.
What I meant by escalation was really escalation in the management system, because if it gets escalated effectively in the management system, it should never reach us. It should only reach us if escalation in the management system failed, in which case I might want to ask the manager of the department, the manager to whom that function reports, to come to the committee and explain themselves. See what I mean? But what I'm saying is that it would be useful in this to have a note of what the timetable for escalation internally in the management system.
Yeah, I think in fairness, that's what 5.8 is trying to set out. Yeah, because at a previous meeting of this committee, we did ask for that sort of escalation through head of service to SLT members, and those are some of the changes now in this report. I think what we might be seeing is a sort of confusion between the words and actual then what we need to see is perhaps a process. Like, while suggested from the chair here, but whenever we have escalation routes, I kind of like to see a flow diagram of where things go, because then it's easier to see things rather than trying to explain it in a paragraph, which then leads to the confusion we're seeing here. So again, a suggestion for the future, a simple flow diagram might help. Councillor Leek, you have another question, and then I can counter.
Certainly do. I would have been asking that particular question, but in the light of the proposed tightening up of the completion or the timescales for completion of the recommendation, it does seem to me that the 6 months is now too long, and that we ought to be reducing the 6 months. And I would have thought 3 months would have been quite long enough. Well, certainly for fundamental, it's the fundamental issues that we should be really monitoring very keenly. So 6 months does seem an excessive time. So that was one of my questions. And the second one relates to back on page 33, because I didn't have a chance to finish that. The corporate groups. Could somebody explain to me what the audit of the Basingview Gateway Review Team comprises?
Thank you, Chair. It's not actually an audit of Basingview Gateway Review Team. It's that I've been asked to be a member of the Gateway Review Team, so it's part of the cross and check of the review of the project.
So, and is that the same as the other one? Those are areas where you've been requested by other parts of the corporate teams to sit in and guide them, and yeah, okay, thank you, that's helpful.
So that means you're going to have less time for internal audit because you're going to be sitting on these committees. Is that what you're saying?
Certainly not.
I go back to the point I'm making on 5.8 and ask whether officers would like to review the 6-month period in the light of the reduced timescales for implementing recommendations.
Well, like I say, I think it's a question that's been asked, and I think it's something that in a second we can have a short discussion about to see if it's the view of the committee. Okay. I've got Councillor Keating with another question.
Thank you, Chair. When I was reading this, I got to page 35 and 5.3, and I welcomed the restriction in terms of the timetable, so that 1 month and 3 months I thought was an excellent endorsement of our oft-repeated view that if there are significant or fundamental issues, to be getting reports after the event, some months later, was just not good enough. And so this is very welcome. However, being slightly cautious, I wanted to ask the question, how long between the identification of the thing that needs fixing and the final report? Because the final report will then come out and you'll then have another month. Now, if the final report came out 3 months later, then they would have a 4-month period. And I prefer just the 1 month at all times in relation to fundamental or significant. So could you perhaps help me to understand the gap between the identification of the problem and the issuing of the final report, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There is no, I can't say it's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, because it's obviously varies between the reports and what you find. If we do highlight a fundamental issue, that will be brought to the attention of the relevant magistrate head of service immediately. So hopefully it can be worked on whilst we're compiling finishing the audit report. And in some occasions, I'm aware that we've brought reports to committee with a summary where they've actually got the recommendation has been completed. So it's been completed during the course of the audit, but I can't give an exact timescale of how long it takes between identifying the recommendation and completion of the report.
You have a follow-up?
And this is a separate issue I wanted to raise, and has already been raised as well. This is in relation to 5.8. I think our experience now is that we have materially influenced the timetable for the addressing of fundamental and significant issues, which is worthwhile doing. We, as a committee, should now revisit the 6 months. And bearing in mind the timetable changes, I would suggest the next relevant meeting, rather than 6 months, for the updating of the information to the committee.
Okay. Right. I hear your
Is that
point.
clear?
Yep, that's
Thank you.
perfectly clear, thank you. I was going to say, I don't have any other questions on this paper. Well, I was going to take questions on the next paper, but as we are vexing over this 6 months period, shall we try and resolve that amongst us in terms of what we mean by that? Because clearly the view is that 6 months is perhaps too long now for fundamental matters. My hesitation when Councillor Keating was suggesting the next available meetings, if the audit took place last week and the next available meeting was the following Monday, that might be too short a period. So, hasty. I know, but it depends what you need to do in order to sort it out. So, with that sort of 6 months is too long, maybe it's the next meeting. Do I have a view of what the committee would like to recommend? Councillor Gardner has a suggestion.
It's not a suggestion, it's an observation. Given the 1 month to get the fundamental error fixed, we will then get a report on the quarterly review of the audits, which will show that there's a fundamental weakness there that has not been resolved, and a reason why. There'll be the officer's comments. 3 months later, if it still hasn't been fixed, then we'll talk to the head of the department. And I think that's fine. I don't think we need to grill the head of department immediately. I think the 6 month gap is probably sufficient.
That's a different view for us, so, yep, can I ask?
I would halve it and make it 3 months. Because I
another-
really do think, that allows for adequate time in the cycle for the ARGA meetings and everything else. I think, honestly, 3 months. We're talking about fundamental recommendations, and they do need implementing.
Okay, Councillor Mitchell.
Yes, I take Councillor Gardner's point on this, that we don't want to act precipitately. However, if it's a fundamental weakness, that is fundamental, definition of it, and therefore it's in the interests of the council and ratepayers, everybody else, that it is fixed, act done. And I'm sure the audit process is capable of working out that if there is some peculiar fundamental weakness, which is going to be impossible to fix within a month, they'll say with this one we'll allow 6 weeks, exceptionally, and then explain this when it comes to committee. If it's a month, it's because it should be able to be fixed in a month. And while I agree in principle that if the 6 months was up on Thursday and this committee met on Monday, it's challenging, but then everybody knows that. They know that at the time, don't they? They know that a month earlier. That if they don't get it fixed within a month, the next audit committee they'll have to come to, put in your diary now, boys, is on Tuesday or Monday the so-and-so. So I'd say it should go to committee at the next committee meeting. The head of service or whoever is responsible for it should appear at committee, the next committee meeting. Unless, of course, he's fixed it by then. He does another 48 hours or 3 weeks or a month or whatever, in which case he can get out of the box and we don't need to waste time on it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Councillor Cubitt, you had a view.
Instead of talking about hypotheticals, let's talk about one fundamental that has now been in existence for probably the totality of my councillorship, and that is Mike Bovis's team and the property asset register, which is still a fundamental and still hasn't been resolved. So, on the basis of Councillor Mitchell's proposal, would that mean that Mike Bovis would have to turn up every time we have an audit meeting?
Would you help us with that?
Thank you, Chair. I would suggest that if he will give an officer response in terms of the deadline, and we know with the property system you're not going to have a new system within a month, so that would be part of the officer's response to the recommendation, and then it'd be to the audit committee if they feel that officer comment was not good enough, not appropriate. Then again, you still have the opportunity to call that officer to account.
Okay, Councillor Mitchell, you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm entirely on this question of the property management system is very, very long-standing, since my time in the council, indeed. And I'm almost still here, partly here anyway. It seems to me that the sort of fundamentalness of it has varied over that period of time. I think this is, and we've had this debate before. It's a bit confusing. And it seems more realistic that that's revisited and that the timetable for it to be fixed is determined, and that timetable has now got to be adhered to. And we need routine reports rather than having somebody appear and explain it to it every time. We need, if it's not fixed in the next quarter, we need a routine report every meeting that says what is the progress, What is the timetable? Why has it not been adhered to? Because if you're doing computer systems, you can't say it's got to be done in a month. You get the wrong system done. Yeah, but a lot of progress, a lot of things have been done in that. I'm not trying to exculpate anybody at all, because it should all have been done 6 years ago, no question about it. And there are no excuses for that. But for us to suddenly say he must come every week, and let's have extra special meetings in case he doesn't come following meeting, is I think the wrong approach. We need a timetable, and we need to know very quickly by message if so, that timetable has slipped again for some reason. If it does slip, we need to manage that in a proactive fashion. And if somebody isn't doing that, they need to be called to account.
The one
Okay.
consolation is, of course, that the head of resources is in charge of Mike Bopes' team, and he's here, so we don't actually need to call anybody.
And I was just going to say, I don't want to make this. This is not a particular agenda item regarding the property services fundamental outstanding. So I think that was useful example and has made a point. It brings me back though to the fact that we have on the table now a view of 6 months is too long. Could it be 3 months, or should it be the next available committee? And I've got Councillor Keating and then Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. One of the issues that we will forever grapple with as we are currently constructed is that we can identify issues, we can identify that solutions must be found, but we cannot apply resources to such problems. So we don't have the right as a committee to say, well, take £1 million and fix it because you must fix it. And someone else must make that decision. And I'm quite comfortable with that, but I think we are beginning to actually make good progress in tightening up the rules and giving people limitations on how they define what fundamental is. It's already defined for us. And a fundamental means something is very seriously wrong and it has to be fixed now. My phraseology, but that's what it means to me. On that particular thing, I was going to make a variation of my previous suggestion, really. The next scheduled meeting in accordance with notice, etc., etc., rather than the next meeting. So, but that would give the minimum of 7 days notice, etc., because of agendas and matters of that nature, and it would likely give a bit more. So instead of remove the 6 months to the next scheduled meeting in accordance with the agenda items and the rules for issuing agendas. Thank you.
That's helpful. Councillor Harvey?
And that would logically stick it within an 8-week cycle, you would have thought, in terms of where it comes from. Just thinking of the two sides of this, I mean, and forgive me for my ignorance of this in this point coming to this committee, but surely if it's coming here for a reason in the context of where it's got to. Therefore, the solution that comes from here needs to have a very clear recommendation, a very clear set of actions that are required of the officer sat here making whatever presentation or written report is required for them to do. And I think a written report is far more appropriate than a verbal update or a verbal presentation. I would much rather have a matter of record from that officer justifying where they've got to and why, so that the committee can ask appropriate questions. It would also be reasonable, would it not, if you were looking for solutions, that the cabinet member with responsibility is also required to attend, so that you have in a sense, if you are looking for the question that Councillor Keating has rightly raised, as a committee you raise concerns, but the officer alone can't do the job because they require executive action, executive decision making, then where does that fit in? Because then you're going to rely on the officer to go away from here with a set of recommendations that this committee is, to present to somebody else, say, well, I can't do this because I'm the officer and I need an executive decision to be made in order to enable me to do it. We get into another 8-week cycle, another cycle of decision making, depending on what level of decision it needs to be. I'm trying to think of where do you tie it all together, and surely it should be here, shouldn't it? Then goes off to find solutions? Or do you then leave it open to another decision making process? Maybe I've misunderstood. I'm trying to think of what's the purpose of bringing it here if not to get a resolution.
Well, I was going to, thank you, Chairman. I was going to support what Councillor Keating said initially, which I think is, I'm not sure it is this committee's role to instruct on how the solution is delivered. It's this committee's role to say there's been an internal control issue, it's been identified by internal audit as fundamental, it's gone through the relevant time periods and it hasn't been resolved. Then you're asking to say, well, why is that? You will then get, and it could be a verbal or written, however the committee wants it, depending on the timing, I would suggest would impact on that, but a written report or something that says, this is where we're at, this is why we're at, this is what we're proposing to do, which was, I think, Councillor Mitchell's view about how are you going to deal with this? And then, if it's still not achieved, you'll get further reports and further issues. But I don't think it's really going to be the case where this committee says, well, what you need to do is X, Y, and Z. That's going to be, depending on the issue, a management issue, or if what comes up from the discussion or from the officer report is, well, I haven't got the resources and these are prioritised, the committee can obviously make recommendations to other committees or to the portfolio holder or cabinet, but it would be recommendations. It wouldn't be an instruction to deliver. That would be my view, Chair.
I think that's very appropriate, and I completely accept where Kevin's coming from on that, and would suggest, others are saying as well, that would be an appropriate way.
Councillor Mitchell.
I was just going to comment on this question of having the portfolio holder turn up. I can't recall in this period I've been on the committee any occasions when somebody's come along and said, I can't implement this because it needs a cabinet decision or because it needs a portfolio holder decision. That seems highly unlikely. I mean, cabinet and portfolio holders don't have any operations responsibility for the council, and in most cases resources can be deflected and identified without going back to cabinet or to portfolio holder. So that would be exceptional, I would have thought, rather than in any sense routine.
Okay, so I think what I've concluded from that is that specific to 5.8 and the 6 months, the committee all agree that 6 months is perhaps too long for the resolution of a fundamental item. We've talked about the options that would reduce that 6 months, and we seem to be settling on preferably a written progress update to the next available ARGA in accordance with the agenda, the agenda timescales are the 7 days before and papers issued, and yes. Is that acceptable to everyone? Yep. Okay. Right. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions on this paper? Because I'll sum up the issues on next. We also picked up 2 other issues, which was... Yeah, I'm dealt with the audit plan yet. I'm just going to close on this paper. Yes, Councillor Cubitt?
Just in terms of the rolling audits that you've got, there's been some pretty significant announcements made in full council over the last 6 months in relation to working with Lloyds Bank on disbursements of subsidised mortgages, in relation to this new fund where monies are going to go for new homes levy. And I'm not asking for them to be audits, but I'm just thinking that they're significant, and disbursements of the new homes bonus, that all needs in the future to be audited, and therefore ought, I think, to be parked into the new system. And those are just examples, not the definitive list.
Thank you. I'll obviously take those on board and we'll feed them in.
Councillor Keating, I was just wondering whether that would be picked up as the audit plan.
Does that
That's the
include
third
a new
paper
community fund?
Yeah.
The answer is yes or no. No, not a can do. Will it or will it not be?
I haven't done a risk assessment on that area in terms of the other audits I've got, because I have a finite resource to deal with, so it'll be based on that. And if I or anybody can assist me in that risk assessment and it comes out high, then obviously we'll put it in.
Okay, I think what I'm just moving into is the audit plan, which is the final paper we're going to look at. That identifies the planned activity for the coming year, and what I'm hearing are some suggested areas to be looked at either in this plan or in future. Yes, so if I can ask.
Yeah, I mean, I think on some of those areas, what we do need to be clear, and what the committee needs to be clear on, is obviously from an audit committee perspective, it's around the internal control environment. So, if it was a grant payment scheme, have grants been assessed and processed and paid in accordance with the requirements, as opposed to a more scrutiny review, which would be, has a particular policy delivered on a particular set of objectives that might have been set for it. And I think it's important for the committee to not mix the two up. Not making a comment about those items. Some of those items would definitely fall into audit. Some might fall into audit and/or an overview. But I just think when we're doing it, the committee's got to be very aware that the internal audit report is about internal control processes.
Sorry, Kevin, you're absolutely right, and that's very important that you've made that distinction, and it's been useful for me for you to do so. And yes, but we're talking about significant sums, so it's great that they'll be parked in the new plan. But in terms of who determines evaluations of implementations of policies into which at Ofcom, whose responsibility does that lie with? So we're talking about millions and millions of 20, 30, 40 million pounds.
Well, in terms of establishing a policy, then that will go through the policy, where it's a new policy, will go through the policy making process. So that will be either with portfolio holder or cabinet or council, depending on the policy. So on something like allocation of new homes bonus, council will set an overall financial policy. There will then be an allocations policy that will be agreed. Something where internal audit would be having a council agreed a policy. How is that policy been? Has that policy been implemented in the internal control respects in line with the criteria, for example?
I suppose this is less for Paul and more for us as audit, so you can tell me to shut up. But for example, on the investment portfolio, which is 100 million, we have this meeting regularly in this group discussing the suitabilities of the investments, and we're now going to have this huge pot of money for new homes, and maybe we need a comparable strategy paper that's brought to this committee on a regular basis over and above policy to check that that money is there for the purpose that it's got. It's a question mark.
Thank you, Chair. I think I would still say that you've got to be very clear to make the distinction between the internal audit and the remit of the audit committee and the wider. And I would suggest that what you're asking for there is not the remit of the audit committee. It's a policy scrutiny. It belongs certainly to be scrutinised, but not by this committee, other than any particular internal control aspects. The link to Treasury management is different in that Council have given this committee a specific delegated responsibility around the monitoring of the Treasury management activity. Therefore, it is within the remit of this committee, and that's the distinction. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, Councillor Harvey.
Just very quickly, Chair. If that's the case, I mean, in terms of it going through an Ofcom, and one of the things perhaps when we look at the committees is the financial side that they get in that respect, because not always at Ofcom do you get the full financial picture of a piece of policy that, in the example you're giving, Kevin, you would be able to examine. So if we're going to look at what the Ofcoms get, that sort of level of detail that Annalise talked about would be very appropriate, I think. It's not always there. It is there in some, and again, it depends how each department and each officer sometimes approaches the information in their reports.
Some useful points came out of that, which I think we'll try and sum up shortly. Councillor Mitchell, I had you down to speak next.
I was proposing to speak on the audit plan, the annual audit plan. I thought you'd moved on.
No.
I thought you'd moved on.
The audit plan I'm referring to is the final page 38 and 39 of paper C. So it's the
I'm sorry, I
internal-
thought I was...
No. I was just doing the third paper. Okay. So do I have any further questions or comments on pages? So 20. Yes. I'm just saying. Do I have any further comments or questions on 28 to 37? No. I think we've done with that one. Right. So 38 and 39, which is the internal audit plan. Do I have any questions on that? Okay, but we'll make the reference to the conversation we've just had, which is to look at some of the areas of new policy and whether or not they need to be considered as part of next year's annual audit plan. Right, we've gone through the three papers in terms of questions. I'll summarise what we've got. So, does any other questions or issues need to be raised on these 3 papers now, or are you happy for me to sum up? Okay. So in terms of the audit strategy, we are recommended to approve it. Can I? Oh, I've done it again, haven't I? Yes. I have this thing about the terms of reference that it doesn't exist. Yeah. In terms of the terms of reference, sorry, most important document which gives us okay. Yeah. Can we all agree that one? Yes. Are we agreed, members? Thank you. Okay, thank you. Now the audit strategy, the one we did have the conversation. Yes, the comments there was we need to reconcile the lists of the key audits at page 33 and page 39.
Sorry, Chairman, can that be recorded, the full list?
Yes.
Be recorded in the minutes, please, because this is not the internal audit, as I pointed out, despite the risk assessment that was undertaken.
No, I think that's fair, yes. So we will actually record what that list is within the minutes, yes. Well, we need to get the list right first, and then we need to make sure that list appears in the minutes as well. I'm happy with that. Okay. In terms of the escalation process, which is 5.8, where we spent a reasonable bit of time, just a suggestion that we might do that in a process flow in future, so we can easily reflect how that works in an escalation route. In terms of the 6 months in 5.8, we agreed that was too long, and we're now going to make that a written progress update at the next scheduled ARGA meeting, subject to process of agenda setting and papers as in our constitution. And then we talked finally about the inclusion of additional new policies and activity in the new audit plan, areas like the new homes bonus. So are we agreed on the strategy paper?
Agreed.
Thank you. And finally, the audit plan. Are we agreed on that one page, as long as the lists are sorted? Yes.
I think it should be noted that the ones in bold are ones that are actually brought forward from the current or from last. I thought that's what you said. Well, you said that.
So just for clarification, the ones in bold are the ones that at the moment I'm carrying out on an annual basis because of risk assessment. So they were carried out last year, they carried out the year before that, they'll also be carried out this year.
That's not what you said, but I'll accept what you say now. But can that be noted? Because I think it is important.
Okay, so can we include an explanation note or footnote at the bottom there to identify the areas in bold? Thank you, members. You happy we've concluded paper C? Right, are we able to go on with paper D?
Thank you
Right,
very much.
we have, sorry, I was just going to introduce you then, sorry. We have, please do.
I just want to make a personal statement that because of the coincidence of Appendix C being C and Paper D being D, I had assumed that we were still on the same subject and that it wasn't going to get, because there's no report for Paper D. It's a submitted document from some outside source.
Yeah, I accept the confusion, and I must
And
admit
I
when
do apologise.
No problem at all. I must admit I'd made the same error when I first ran through the papers myself, but that was picked up earlier on. So let me now introduce Anna Blackman from PwC, who's the author of these 2 papers we now have. And, well, please. Anne is going to introduce the papers and guide us to what she requires of us this afternoon, and that's papers D and paper E. Okay. Anna Blackman. Yes, the name's in the report. Okay. Anna, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. So you've got 2 papers. The first one is very brief. It's an annual certification report and tells you what we've had to do this year in relation to certificating grant claims, which is work we are required to do on behalf of the Audit Commission. This is a statutory report that I have to give you every year. It just relays the work we've done. We signed the 2 grant claims within the required timetable. There were some minor adjustments to the claims, but those adjustments didn't make any difference to the number, so the financial envelope on the claim, but we did have to make some adjustments. And grant claims are audited in a very specific way. They're not audited the same way I audit the accounts. The Audit Commission tells me how I must audit them, and if I find a mistake, what I must then do about it. even if that doesn't necessarily impact the number on the claim. So this report is to tell you the results of that. As I said, claims are in on time. There's a recommendation in response to one of the errors we found, which the team have dealt with, and the issues that we identified in the previous year were not re-noted in the current year. So as far as we're concerned, they've been dealt with. So I wasn't going to say anything else other than, but I'm happy to take questions, obviously.
Yeah, I think that comes with the territory, whether you want to take them or not. Councillor Leake.
Yes, I was a little surprised. I mean, as far as I could see, doesn't have one. As far as I could see, the only material error was an overpayment of £12.92, and as a result of that, we are appointing a performance and compliance officer who must cost us an awful lot more. The proportionality seemed a little wrong to me, but perhaps I'm old-fashioned.
I don't think you're appointing the performance and compliance officer in response to the audit recommendation. I think you were appointing one anyway, and they're confident that this error won't re-arise because you now have that person. But I don't think for a minute you employed them because we found a £12 error. I think you were having one anyway.
Well, I was a little surprised, but it reads.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Mitchell.
I was just interested to know, were you surprised to find a £12 error? £13 nearly. Much bigger than £12. £13 nearly.
£12.92.
Well, that's right. No, somebody referred to a £12 error. Were you surprised to find this error, or were you surprised that you didn't find more errors?
I would be more worried if we hadn't found anything wrong. I think with the volume of transactions that you do, I think to find small numbers of errors is going to happen. Human nature, we're not robots. I would be more worried if I hadn't found anything, in a way, because that would make me wonder what the value of doing this is. But there's a question about that more broadly anyway, but we won't get into that. So no, it doesn't worry me. I mean, we do find we do this across all of our councils where it's relevant, and there are a lot of councils who have more errors than you.
Councillor Leake.
I was a little surprised to see the fee had actually risen for this work as a result of further testing required as a result of the errors noted as detailed above. But there didn't seem to be a lot of errors noted above. So why did the fee go up by 2,700?
The audit fee gets set at the beginning of the year and is based on not finding any errors. The Audit Commission's methodology, which I don't have any say in how I implement that, says if you find an error, this is what you will do. And it meant we had to test more claimant forms because you have to prove that there isn't a bigger error. So we had to...
That'll do.
Thank you. Sorry, I can't resist a comment on that. I love the idea of a pricing strategy that the whole purpose of it is to find errors, and then you have a price based on not having errors. But yeah, okay. I think we all find the bizarre nature of it, but nonetheless we accept it's not determined by yourself or PwC. It's by a greater authority. Thank you, Councillor Mitchell.
I'm confident, Chairman, that in view of the fact that we have other councils that have a lot more errors, we are paying one of the lowest fees for this of any council. I'm sure that's the case.
Do we have any other questions, members, on this particular paper? No, I think it's quite a good testament to our internal record keeping and general efficiency of our processes that we have so few errors. So certainly didn't want to pass up the opportunity to say that. And in that department, but it's if you wish to qualify it, but nonetheless. that takes us to paper E, which is our external audit plan. And again, if I ask Anna to introduce the paper.
So this is the audit plan for the coming year, so the financial year that's just finished. We do this later in the year than we used to, reflecting the fact that actually we don't need to do it as early because the Audit Commission gives us a bit more time to do our planning. In preparing this plan, we consider what's going on at the council. We come and we meet with Kevin and his team, what's going on in the wider economic climate to the extent that that's relevant to your audit. And this paper articulates the things I need to tell you as your auditor before I start my audit. And the early part of that starts next week. So on page 5, you've got a brief introduction about the purpose of the plan. So I have to give you an audit plan because auditing standards requires me to. It gives you an opportunity to comment on the risks and what we're planning to do, so I'll come on to that. It also gives you what I'm sure will be an interesting update on your audit fee, because that's something we always tend to have some discussion about. So that's the introduction on page 5. If you turn over to page 7, this is sort of the chunky part of the plan, which is the risk assessment. So as your auditor, I have to do a risk assessment about what are the risks that your financial statements are materially misstated. I'm not signing an audit opinion that says they're 100% right. I'm signing an audit opinion that says whether they are materially correct or not. So it's in that context we do that risk assessment. And auditing standards require me to flag to you anything that we've categorised as a significant risk. And that's in auditing terms. It's not in business terms to the council. It's what's the risk that your financial statements might be wrong. The first two of those are around, the first one is fraud and the management override of controls. So that's senior management in the organisation overriding the established controls in the council in order to manipulate the financial statements to give the number they might want it to give. And if you think about auditing standards being based largely on what happens in the private sector, that's about, for example, management manipulating the bottom line so they get a bigger bonus, for example. I'm not going to comment on the banks. So auditing standards presume that on every single audit there is a risk of fraud through management overriding controls. And the way in which that would be done ordinarily is through the use of journals. So you've got loads of transactions going through your general ledger, but management can make adjustments to those numbers through manual journals that go into the financial statements. So we do a lot of work around the journals that have gone into the system to understand the rationale for those and whether they are changing the numbers. So that's an important part of what we do. The second part is around anything that's a management estimate, for example. So if there's not an invoice or a piece of paper or some third-party evidence that proves a transaction, and management have to make some estimates, we look at those to see if there's any bias in those. So that's the first one. The second one is not dissimilar, and it's about the recognition of income and expenditure. And that comes back to, could management change how or what they recognise as income and expenditure in order to manipulate the bottom line, the profit, whatever it is management are being performance managed to do. In your context, that's slightly different, but you will be under pressure. Management will be under pressure to deliver the budget, for example, and council tax not have to go up. So we do work around when income is recognised, so have you got it in the right year? Are you deferring income, for example, to the following year to make next year easier? And doing the same with expenditure. And again, auditing standards say that's a significant risk on any audit. So those two significant risks reflect the fact that you have auditors because you need to come and check, someone needs to come and check management are doing what they should be doing. So those are the only two significant risks we've got on this audit. If you turn over onto page 8, there's an elevated risk. And an elevated risk is something that's not quite significant, but does pose additional risk in the audit. And that's the valuation of your properties. That reflects the fact that those are very big judgments that are made in the accounts. Valuations are not scientific, they're more of a art form, shall we say. So there is some estimation involved in valuations, and because of the scale and the nature of your estate, actually it's a very, very big number, and you wouldn't have to get it very wrong in order for it to mean your accounts were materially misstated. We do also have the many down issue that we will need to make sure we've covered off at the end of the year. Obviously that's been a bit of a moving feast for the past 6 months or so. So, just being polite, we will go back round the loop on that valuation and make sure we're still comfortable. So as part of that process, we consult we have a team of valuations experts who sits within the firm. We consult with them as part of that piece of work to make sure they're comfortable. So that reflects that that's a very material number to your accounts, and actually you wouldn't need to be very wrong to be materially misstated. I'm going to stop there before I go on to the rest of the plan in case you want to pick any of that up. Any questions on that now?
Oh, Councillor Keating first.
Thank you, Chair. I'm first because I was the first to ask for a question, because I was struck repeatedly by when I read the paperwork in relation to this item, your reference to the Audit Commission. Now, I believe I'm right in thinking that the Audit Commission was abolished some while ago, and I was intrigued when reading the papers to this reliance on the Audit Commission when it's been abolished because it's no longer necessary, as far as I understand it. Thank you.
The Audit Commission hasn't yet been abolished. The Audit Commission's delivery team, so the part of it that was responsible for delivering 75% of the NHS and local government external audits, that work has all transferred to the private sector. The Audit Commission still exists as the regulator of audit for local government and NHS and NHS organisations. So it still dictates how I do my work, what I get paid, who gets appointed to which organisation, and will continue to do so until at least the 31st of March 2017.
Thank you for that clarification.
Councillor Mitchell next.
I always ask the silly questions. I'm in charge of asking stupid questions, Raphael. You probably understood that already. I was going to ask whether, in this risk assessment aspect, other than specifics such as many down, do we differ significantly from other authorities? And what, for example, would you regard not under from another authority? Give a couple of examples of what other things might be regarded as significant or material risks.
As an auditor, I don't ever think there are any stupid questions, so feel free to ask as many as you like.
You're not in the IT. You get paid for questions.
I really don't get paid for questions, don't worry.
Please, come on.
And how do you compare? This is not an unusual set of risks for a district council. Other sorts of things that generally drive risks might be if you were having a very significant restructuring programme, for example, and if you were incurring a lot of redundancy costs or had lots of provisions, those sorts of things, that often generates risks in audit plans, because the timing of those and valuing their estimates, their timing is uncertain, and also there's some quite strict accounting standards about when you do that. Big scale capital redevelopment often generates risks if you're doing that yourself. So if you were building a new town hall, for example, there are risks associated, accounting risks associated with that. If you had a pension fund, that often, those sorts of things, so big sort of quite significant changes. Big changes to accounting systems as well often generate risks in audit plans, because actually the nuts and bolts of the IT system and transaction processing can cause big risks.
Your mic's off.
What prompted the question was looking at the recognition of income and expenditure risks that you've noted here. What would somebody gain from, because you referred to the private sector, and one can see in the private sector there are lots of ways in which people might gain, but what would somebody gain from revenue being recognised that the authority is not entitled to, what would be the benefit of the fraud, and to whom in these cases in a local authority?
So in your context, and in a public sector context, that's more about that it's someone manipulating the accounts because they're being performance managed, or want to have a certain outcome. So if the chief executive has set a budget, he's probably going to, well, he will be performance managed for delivering that budget. He might be inclined, if he thought he was a long way off, to do something in the accounts that meant it looked like you had hit that budget. So people in the public sector have less motivation in terms of performance related pay. That doesn't mean they don't want to protect their job.
So, and this is, I just finish here, Chairman. If, for example, the Audit Committee or this committee were to find that when it was doing performance reviews, that all the budgets kept changing so that the budget always looked as if it was on plan, that might not be a good idea.
That's a tricky one, because that's about what you do in year to hit the budget, isn't it? Well, the answer is, what we need to do is, what we do at the end of the year is go and look at the actual transactions in the accounts and vouch that those transactions are real transactions. We don't look at the budget per se, but we use the performance management part as the motivation as to why someone might do what they do. We don't go and say, did you hit the budget, and therefore what does that mean? We go and test individual transactions and make sure they're real, because we know management might be motivated to manipulate the numbers in the accounts. Does that distinction help?
Did I help him out?
I said the last question.
I'm going to say, I'm not sure I want to go, if we are content that we're getting to a point, then can we move on? Okay, in which case, Councillor Cubitt, you're next on the questions.
Yes, thank you very much. And in terms of your valuations of property as being an elevated element of risk, I completely agree with you. We have an enormous, as you know, commercial portfolio of 250 million, and I'm sure that's considerably larger than many of our fellow peers in the sector. In relation to the money down, just as a question, we bought it for 10 million, we then reduced it to 1.6, we then upped it to 5.4, we now have potentially 3,000 minimum houses being built on it in the next 10 years. In terms of the impact on the accounts, when the value of the asset goes up in the balance sheet, what then happens with the sudden increase in that value elsewhere? Where does it get, sorry, because I'm illiterate when it comes to accounting, how is that booked? The uplift.
Yeah.
If I can assist, it goes into a revaluation reserve on the balance sheet. So it's an entire. Initially it goes through the revenue account and then is reversed. So in effect, it ends up as a revaluation change in the balance sheet. So it doesn't impact on bottom line revenue or council taxpayers until such a point as there is a disposal of the asset, and then there is a material impact depending on the level of disposal. But it's a valuation change on the balance sheet in essence.
Can we ask, for the purposes of transparency and openness to our taxpayers, that with significant revaluation adjustments as a result of some of the revaluation of some of our property portfolios, which are going through the mill at the moment, is it permissible for revaluation accounts to have specifically dedicated and identifiable amounts attributed to the asset in question?
I mean, again, if I can help, if I feel I can answer the question, I mean, obviously the assets are all held on the asset registers as individual assets. They're all valued. They're valued individually or as groups of assets. So they're valued independently. So the records are all there. In terms of the annual statement of accounts, that information is aggregated up in accordance with accounting standards and is reported valuation changes are listed in aggregate in notes to the accounts, again in line with accounting requirements. In terms of specific assets, we don't currently produce specific asset information, except that a paper later on, I think it's the next paper actually, is suggesting that for the Manydown land we will provide that information on an asset basis, but we don't do it for other assets. It's held in the accounts on an individual basis, but we don't report it in that way.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm actually asking it of Anna because I quite like, if possible, for our accountants to keep an eye on such a significant asset, because it has got huge inherent value, and that therefore if I were to be reading the balance sheet of a private company and there was a significant asset of that value, I would like it as a special item or a special note. That's the purpose of the question.
The short answer to the question is yes, you could do that, but you have to balance putting enough information in the accounts for the reader of the accounts to understand versus too much information, because I'm guessing the list, if you were to do it for all of your assets that are over £1 million, for example, the list would be really, really, really long. And if the other thing is you would have to do it, so you'd have to decide which class of assets you were going to do it for, and then do it for them all. It wouldn't be appropriate to I use the word cherry pick, but just do Manydown. Actually, you'd have to think about what is it you're trying to tell the reader of the accounts, and what else would they need to know, because actually you've got some other really valuable assets. So yes, you could do it, but you do need to balance telling people what's useful and not putting too much information in the accounts. But actually, if you were going to do it for those types of investment, you could have a cut-off point, yes, that was sensible, for example. But I would err against putting too much more detail in, because people, your accounts for a set of financial statements are local government accounts are not as user-friendly to the outside world as some other sets of accounts.
Thank you. Councillor Leake, you're next.
I just wanted to take up the budget point. I thought that somewhere in our accounts we did actually show the budget and compare the outcome.
At the risk of rerunning what I know was a fairly lengthy discussion at a performance panel on the same issue, I would say we do produce original budget and revised budget information, and we provide that in the monitoring and in the outturn reports. And a budget will move in line with approved environment regulations, or financial regulations. So a budget does move, and that was the distinction between auditing actual transactions. Changes in budget can occur appropriately for management purposes and that are based on environments, and therefore you'll get a revised latest budget that is different from your original budget. But those budget environments always balance off, so you can always see the total movement.
Thank you. All I wanted you was to confirm that the accounts do contain a budget of some sort, so I really wanted to take up with Anna the fact that she said they had no regard to the budget, and I think that can't be right. And I, as you know, I totally disagree with the concept of changing a budget. It's absolutely ridiculous. You have a budget and you stick to it and you compare the outcome to the original budget in any conventional business. Clearly, local authorities are different, but it's the point. Do you not compare at all?
Just before analytics, well, I was just going to say the budget information is in the forward to the accounts, not in the actual statements. That was all I was going to say, Chair.
We will have a look at the budget. So when we do our planning work, we will, to say I have no regard for the budget was probably me taking it a bit too far. I mean, I don't audit the budget, but when we do the planning, we do what we call analytical review, which is looking at the council's performance to that point in the year, and looking at where are the variations? Is the
Yeah,
council
I
performing
understand.
as
You
we would
don't have to
expect?
explain it,
So,
just that you
so
said
we.
you didn't- it
Yes,
wasn't
I
in
was
the
probably
accounts.
being overly simplistic.
Thank God I was, and was, as was Mrs. Cubitt. I just wanted to also emphasise, and it's already been said, the valuation of properties. The area that concerns me the greatest is our retail property, because we're all aware of the closures that are going on, and I think there's a degree of optimism about the value of our properties, and I do hope that that will be looked at particularly carefully in the light of the current retail market or economy.
I would need to double check this, but I think your retail properties in your accounts are valued on a fairly standard basis, which is what rental do you get for them times the lease. So we don't value them as in what they're valued to them. There's quite a specific way of valuing them. Now I need to go back and double check that. But when we come back, I'm more than happy that we give you some extra commentary on how you're valuing your retail. But I think it probably is lease payments and leases rather than value in the market. And I understand your point there about the market.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't have any other questions. Oh, Councillor Mitchell.
Yes, just on your page 17, page 68, 303, under, I just wondered why,
We haven't got that far yet.
what are we on?
We're just...
We're just about to introduce the next section of the report, which includes the item you refer to and fees as well, and then you can ask your question. I'll put you first.
I'll do. I will do the rest of the plan, and then you can ask me all the rest of your questions. So on page 9, we talk about materiality. As I said, materiality is the concept that we can't audit every single number in the accounts. That's just not feasible.
Okay.
So we audit to a level of materiality. You'll see on page 10 there's a number. So overall materiality for this council is £1.9 million. That's set based on what auditing standards say materiality should be. But the important thing to remember is that despite there being a number, there are qualitative aspects to materiality as well as quantitative aspects to materiality. So, for example, if I was to identify a fraud and it wasn't material, I would still tell you because it's important. So it is a number, but there's a whole other set of factors that are taken into account. The thing to draw to your attention, sort of halfway down page 10, is that we have to set a de minimis threshold, so over which we have to report errors to this audit committee. That's not to say we wouldn't tell management about the smaller ones, but actually we have a de minimis level of £95,000. You are within your rights to have a smaller number if you want a smaller number. You haven't had a smaller number in the past. And if we were to find lots and lots and lots of very small errors, then we may well tell you that we found lots and lots of very small errors. But it just gives us a little bit of... you might end up with a really, really long report as well, because you do tend to find some little errors when you're auditing the accounts. So that de minimis threshold is there.
Has it changed from last year?
No.
But it's clear, true. Yeah, 95,000. Less than your pension.
Pages 11. Pages 11.
Can we just let Hannah speak and then we'll ask the questions after?
Pages 11 and 12 outline what our responsibilities are with respect to fraud, what management's responsibilities are with respect to fraud, and what your responsibilities are with respect to fraud. So it is our responsibility. So we have to plan our audit in a way that would identify material fraud. We would not. We don't plan an audit to identify any fraud, so that's just something you need to be aware of. Part of your role is to make sure that management are putting systems and processes in place with respect to fraud. So there are a set of questions on page 12 about whether you know of any fraud that I need to know about. So I suggest we come back to that at the end. if I turn to page, I won't go through the rest of this in any huge detail. Page 14 just outlines some extra work we did for you outside the scope of the audit, because we're required to report that to you. It was a small piece of work done for the team about a lease reassignment, so that's reported there, along with why it's not a threat to our independence. And the other thing I'll draw to your attention before I take any more questions is page 16 outlines the fee. You will see, I suspect with great delight, that the audit fee has gone down significantly. The scale audit fee, the 73,325, is a number determined by the Audit Commission. We're allowed to vary that number if we believe that there's a significant amount of risk associated with auditing the council. We don't believe that to be the case, so that's the scale fee for the council. It has gone down significantly compared to last year. That is because the Audit Commission has made reductions to its audit fees, and we are no longer required to pass a very significant proportion to the Audit Commission, which we have had to do in the past. And I'm going to stop there and just take any more questions you might have.
I forgot Councillor Mitchell and then Councillor Leake.
I'm just jumping straight to appendix other engagement information on page 17 or page 68 of 303, and I'm wondering, I was interested in the way so many people send out emails with 87 lines of text underneath them explaining why emails are so terrible things and so forth. Pricewaterhouse appeared a bit neurotic about electronic communication because you are we're each responsible to protect your own blah blah blah, and we and PwC have no liability to each other on any basis blah 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 for any connection with the electronic communication of information between us and our alliance. In other words, anything that you did between us on paper, you would have reliability for, and we would have liability for, but we don't have any liability if we do it electronically. It doesn't seem to make sense. How is it you manage to exclude all these liabilities only in the case of electronic communication, as if it weren't the case that electronic communication is actually more secure and reliable than paper communication?
Um,
That's put in by some twist, isn't it? It's legal.
Melanie's gone.
Oh, not our legal. Is
no,
there?
so these paragraphs are intended to protect you and us around the exchange of electronic information. It doesn't, what it's not saying is that information you send us electronically can't be used in the way paper information
I
could be.
understand what it says.
I think it's to...
Why are you not disclaiming all responsibility for information shared on paper? You might seek to ask your firm. I'd like to have an answer, because this is demeaning electronic communication.
I take the point, and I see the relevance given the rise and importance and reliance on electronic communication. I don't think Anna can help us here today, but I think we can usefully ask the question as to whether there's a view in relation to the particular disclaimer at the back relating to electronic communication. So I think useful point raised. I've got Councillor Leake next, and then... Oh, on this point, please do then.
Thank you, Chair. I wouldn't presume at all to try and answer for Anna, but I think it's in here. It's in relation to the fact that the electronic communication can be intercepted or corrupted, and that is a general basis of reluctance for reliability of that type of transaction.
That's a helpful indication of explanation. I think if you want to raise the question, we can see if there's a further explanation.
Sorry, in the old days it was referred to in the very early stages of this type of communication was that it's like a postcard written in pencil. It can be read by anybody and changed by anybody.
Fair point, and I recall that. Yes. Councillor Leake, you have the next question.
I'm just looking at page 64 in case Councillor Keating wants to know. The audit team, how often do you actually change the audit team? I mean, I'm not saying I have any problem with, I mean, Daniel has been around for some time and he's excellent, etc., etc. But there must come a time when familiarity, well, whatever. But, I mean, so how long would a manager remain on a particular client job?
There are a set of ethical standards that we have to comply by, which are set by the Audited Practices Board. Generally 10 years.
As long as that.
Councillor Parker. Oh, sorry, Councillor Leake, you had a further question, sorry.
Well, I did, but I just want, I mean, if we turn over the page, we're told this extra bit of work, but it sort of raises more questions than it actually answers. I just wanted to know what it was why we had to spend 12,000 quid, because it's quite a lot of money.
Which one of you would like to take this?
It was a specific piece of work associated with the assignment of the festival place lease, and the costs were refunded as part of that transaction.
Thank you, Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on page 62, which is the risk of fraud, and particularly I wanted to ask a question with regard to this committee's responsibility under that heading. It makes reference to creation of appropriate tone at the top, and I just wanted to get an understanding as to which top we're referring here. Are we talking the chief executive and the executive officers? Are we talking of the council members? How does that trickle down, please?
From my perspective, I would say it's both. As the audit committee, you're responsible for ensuring the council has appropriate sort of internal controls, and that you take any action if deficiencies in internal control are identified. I think tone at the top embraces the senior management team, but I think it also embraces the councillors as a whole, and I think it's things like whistleblowing, those sorts of things, codes of conduct. How are you making sure those things are really prevalent in the organisation to make sure that the culture in the organisation is right.
So then it's a question to officers in the sense of that we've got robust policies in place that deal with those issues, and I know we have, through Human Resources Committee, addressed those things, but that's what we're looking for, so as we can evidence that. And it's important that we do. It comes under our responsibility as a committee.
I'll try and help the committee there, Chair. There is actually on page 12, I think, 63 of 303 is that those sort of questions that external audit are asking of the committee, and I just wanted to highlight a couple of points. One is that we're proposing to bring forward on a sort of a regular basis to this committee details of the sort of anti-fraud activity that the council does, because internal audit team includes fraud members, and there is work going on around fraud generally and around obviously housing benefit related fraud as well. So part of that proposal is to bring forward a sort of a regular report on that, which links into what we're doing individually as a council, but how that compares with what goes on across the country. So a bit of context information. So the intention, I think, is to start that September. In terms of fraud protection measures, as Councillor Parker says, yes, the council does have a range of policies and procedures in place. Those include obviously having an internal audit team that looks at areas and can look at fraud. Dedicated fraud resources, as I said, as part of that internal audit team. Council does have a fraud hotline and a dedicated fraud email address. So there's those things that are promoted on the web and on the BDBC website. Has a whistleblowing policy, as was mentioned. that's been updated, takes part in the Audit Commission data matching exercises, which are about helping to identify fraud, and is currently rolling out some sort of fraud awareness to all staff. That's something the internal audit team did a few months ago. So again, there's some work that's going on that. I think it's a question for Councillor Cubic, so I'll stop at that point.
Can I apologise, I just left the room to get a cup of tea, but in terms of the definition of fraud, Anna, would you only define embezzlement or money as being fraud, or would a dishonest act be, would fraud include a wider definition of a dishonest act by a member of staff or a councillor? Or is it purely relate to financial?
It doesn't have to purely relate to financial. So other examples that you can come across are people using false references to get a job. The new the Fraud Act doesn't define it terribly well, but it doesn't always have to be about you embezzling money. It might be that you've gained access to funds through getting through by falsifying a reference. You've been paid a salary that you weren't really entitled to. So it does normally come back to money in some way. There's a question about the line between, say, for example, if someone is giving work to a supplier who's their mate, they might not be getting any financial benefit, but actually that's for a raft of reasons not appropriate. And the boundaries of what's fraud and what's not are a little bit grey, but in my context it's about the misappropriation of funds. It's about fraudulently manipulating the financial statements in whatever way in order to come back to whatever number you might want it to be. So in our context it is a financial fraud, but the definition can be broader than that.
Councillor Keaton, you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. I have two. They're not for Anna. In this case, they're as a consequence of Kevin's intervention. Simple question one. He made reference to regularly reporting to here. My question is, what's the definition of regular? Because as people will tell you, once every 100 years is regular. And the other question relates to the whistleblowing policy, which he referred to, and it therefore arises, the question is, do we have gagging clauses? Do we authorise and use gagging clauses? Right? So there are two questions, and they arise as a consequence of a contribution other than yourselves, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As I say, the intention is to bring a report on reporting back in September, so it would be for the committee to determine what frequency they think is appropriate. I think we'll be suggesting something like 6 monthly, but obviously that will be for that meeting discussion. Compromise agreements, the council has entered into compromise agreements, and they have been reported annually in aggregate terms as part of one of the HR committee reports that covers payments made for the year in terms of any redundancy or others. Those are reported there in aggregate terms.
Point of order, that doesn't answer the question. That answered the question, do we have compromise agreements? And the question was, do we have gagging clauses in relation to compromise agreements or otherwise? Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Sorry if I didn't answer that question. I answered it in the way that I was able to, in that I know the financial figures and those financial details of any particular agreement. I'm not aware of, and we would have to get back to the committee on that. If that's a.
And finally, Chair, can I ask if you will come back to us? Thank you.
Yeah, hang on a second. Was your comment on the same point?
It was actually, in view, I mean, to be honest, given all the press coverage and, for example, something like over £200 million has been awarded under a certain group of councils in the form of gagging clauses, and in view of the fact we get the Reaper report, maybe we ought in audit to be notified of compromise agreements on a regular basis, because I personally, as a taxpayer, do not approve of these agreements and the spending of our taxpayers' money in that way, and therefore I think if the committee were minded to receive a notification that we have a zero return, then that would be beneficial to our taxpayers.
Okay, I'm going to ask Councillor Harvey yours on this point. Yeah, and then Councillor Keating, and then we'll perhaps see where we're going with this.
Thank you, Chair. The issue related to compromise agreements was raised at HR last meeting, and one of the things that flowed out from that was exactly as I think where this conversation's going around the table. It's one, the signing off of, where is the oversight of, and who makes the decision of what comprises the compromise agreement in the first place. So the processes that are involved, I think, are important here to understand. Now, whether it's here or whether it's HR or whether it's both, I think you both have a role. HR and ARC both have a role here for the obvious reasons, as Kevin points out. For me, I would appreciate a step-by-step answer. How many? Doesn't have to be detailed in terms of, no one's asking for that, nor should they. But it's how many, what involved the gagging clause, what was the construct of the gagging clause, and where did it come from, how was it constructed legally, and how is it expected to be enforced. I want to understand the process involved here, and the implications of that in the context of both ARGA and HR's responsibilities. The future point about how we deal with them was the point that was left with HR to be looked at, and that was picked up under the internal governance bits of looking at member-officer relationships, which is something to come back to. But I just want to get the process right. Who, where, how and what in detail of the process, not necessarily an individual example case, because we shouldn't have that.
Okay. Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. I've opened up a different arena, but it wasn't my intention. Let's be quite clear. I've been involved in my previous working life with compromise agreements quite regularly, and there is nothing wrong with compromise agreements because they take into account the interest of the employer and the employee. The need to report them, I have no difficulty either way. They obviously have to be recorded and accounted for anyway, but how they're reported is not the issue as far as I'm concerned, and I think they should not. Compromise agreements should not be confused with gagging or not gagging. They're totally separate issues. Now, certainly public servants and public ministers have recently outlined an arena or a policy which is gagging clauses should not be accepted. And that's really what's influencing me, because I don't believe gagging clauses should be accepted. Compromise agreements are a necessity in an industrial environment where you have employer and employees and there is on occasion a dispute. But a gagging issue, which is totally separate, I believe should not be allowed. And Kevin said he doesn't know the answer to the question. He come back to us, and I think I would like to wait until we hear back from Kevin before we talk about gagging any further. Thank you.
I think that's helpful. I think the two areas I take from that is yes, to respond on the question about gagging clauses, whether or not we currently use them, and to come back on that before the next meeting. I think as well it might be helpful to follow up with HR committee in terms of their action, because I don't want to duplicate something they might also be doing more appropriately in relation to compromise agreement, because that takes it more to the HR field. So if you're happy with both of those actions, I think that would be something we can usefully then follow up before the next meeting. Okay. Do I have any more questions on the audit paper? No. In which case then, we've got both papers that we've gone through with Anna, and I'm going to take us back to the resolutions we're asked to look at. So in relation to paper D, this is on page 40 of 303. It's not numbered 40 of 303, but you'll cleverly find it after number 39, so that helps, yes. And there's two resolutions there, which is we're asked to consider the adequacy of the proposed management plan, which we've gone through, and the adequacy of progress made in implementing the plan or the prior year plan, Appendix C. Are you content, members, that we've covered off both those areas and with what's proposed in the plan?
Agree.
Thank you. Then to page 56 of 303. Page 56. Yes, Councillor Mitchell. Yeah. You content, or have you got any issues? Right.
In the letter, the adequacy of the proposed management action plan for 2011/12. Are we doing a management plan for 2 years ago? What does that mean? It says a period ended 31st March.
Oh, yes.
We certified 2 claims and returns. That's certification work. If we've already done it, why are we doing why are we agreeing the adequacy of a management action plan for it? But shouldn't we be agreeing the adequacy of a management action plan for what we're going to do? Just slightly baffled as to the
Is it
timing.
not the progress
I'm
made?
often baffled as to timing with
Yeah,
accounting.
is it not the progress made on that?
On page 9, there's an action plan resulting from the findings from the work. So it's, are you content that that's adequate? And yes, I accept it relates to something that happened a little while ago. But we don't finish the work until just before Christmas.
Basically, we found the error of the £12.92. We've put in place a set of actions to deal with it, and those actions will be concluded later this year. No, I'd rather be correct and accurate with it. Thank you. And in case of paper E, that's page 56 of 303. We are asked to consider the proposed scope and confirm the scope of the plan, and confirm we're comfortable with the audit risk and approach, consider and respond to the matters relating to fraud, and approve our proposed audit fees for the year. That's not beyond the bounds of what we've already discussed. So we agreed, members? Thank you very much, and thank you, Anna, for attending and guiding us through those papers. And thank you, Paul, for staying. Yes. So I think that helpfully takes us on to paper F. Thank you. And Kevin's going to introduce this one.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. This is a proposal to respond to the request of the committee to put into one place in one report for the committee all the relevant areas of reporting of the many down land holdings. So this is an attempt to do that, and what the report does is link the JMC revenue expenditure. So if I go through page 75, you've got a summary position which would have some narrative about any particular changes, which would summarise the JMC, any Basingstoke expenditure and HCC expenditure. So there'd be a summary with a narrative. There would be the JMC accounts, which are reported separately at the moment. Those would still be reported separately as they need to be, but would be brought together here, which show expenditure and income, and again would have a narrative associated with them. There would be a summary with some detail around expenditure in year for promotion or expenditure by both this council and by HCC, again with appropriate narrative. At the moment that information goes to the JMC particularly. Maintaining and reporting the historic record of expenditure on promotion, which is in section 5. Detail, which we discussed earlier, on the valuation. This comes from the statement of accounts. Remember, this is an annual looking back report, so what's proposed, which takes the opening and closing valuation and valuation change, and then gives some narrative about that valuation, the rationale for that valuation, and any significant change. Detail on the position of the HCC option to purchase. So at the moment that lists the holding costs or the notional interest charges and any repayments that the county have made, and leaves a net cost of the option in line with the agreement. So that's the intention, is to bring it all together into one place, to produce this as in effect an outturn report for this committee once a year. It will go in as part of the outturn report, and the report recommends that the committee agrees to this proposed consolidated report containing the information that I've just run through. So, open for any questions, Chair.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. If and when it gets round to creating a JDC rather than a JMC, I presume we'll still have the management element, but there'll also be another column added, so to speak. Yeah, okay. And finally, in terms of the legal implications, just to be absolutely clear in my head, nothing in this report or nothing that is proposed or the words that are used in any way changes anything to do with the purchase of the land under the Town and Country Planning Act. That still stands in all its form and glory, as was in 95-96.
Yeah, the intention here is not, it doesn't make any comment on it's to consolidate the particular information that's held or reported in different ways at the moment into one place so that the reader, the public, the committee can see that information all in one place, which I think was what was tasked of me at the previous meeting.
Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this report because I was certainly one of the participants who repeatedly referred to the lack of ability to bring it together in one's head. And so I welcome this paper, and I also welcome the assurance that we will get the updated version annually, and therefore we'll be able to see how things are going and what's influencing them. I have two questions. One question is under item 7 on page 77. Now, are we talking about 50% of this council's interest? Currently, this council's interest could well be identified as only 50% already because we have promised 50%. Therefore, if you talk about 50% of this council's interest, you could well be talking about a 25% posture. So I'm wanting to ensure that we have clarity here. Thank you.
Yes, it reflects all of the agreements that the council entered into back in 1996 in terms of all of those agreements and the payment to the Menidale trustees as a result of any development, and then the sharing of that after that. Those payments and receipts have been made. The sharing of those potentially would be 25% to this council, 25% to the county council.
Bearing in mind the potential for misunderstanding in relation to these numbers, would it be possible to have a slightly clearer outline, please?
What contained in those two lines? Yeah, just to explain what Kevin's just explained in those two lines. Yeah, okay, that's helpful. Okay.
Thank you for that. My second question relates to the holding costs. We're sorry, it's continuation of item 7, and it goes over the page to page 78. Yeah. You see, Councillor Leake would always refer to the pages as well. Notional costs. Is it actual or is it notional? Thank you.
I'll endeavour to help there, Chairman. The costs are actual. The council bills, this council bills annually Hampshire County Council for those figures and has billed for those figures that are shown there. They represent notional interest. This is the accounting in terms of the agreement, and they are holding costs. They were part of the agreement. They represent, in effect, notional interest, and that's why it's shown like that. So the notional part is that it's notional interest. They are actual holding costs that the county pay and that we bill the county for each year.
When you say bill, does that mean we get? No. I'm just asking clarification.
On this one, we bill separately as a separate invoice, and we get payment. And I'm not aware that we've got any outstanding payments from HCC on this. So,
Thank you for that. And the next question relates to, hey, say again? That says here.
Your next question, Councillor Keating?
The
Yeah.
next question is, how is the notional interest rate defined and quantified, please?
it's defined in the agreement between us and the county. It's based on I think it's a 2-year PWLB rate, which is a national government debt office rate, based on a £5 million option cost. That's the rationale. So you can see the percentage figures that are in brackets on that table. That represents what the relevant index is or was for the year, as specified in the agreement. So it's a government borrowing rate that's used to work out that interest figure. But it's in line with the contractual agreement.
I understand the answer to the question. Can I just ask for further clarification, please? Am I correct in reading the table as 1496, the notional interest rate was 6.75%, and we actually received 341,160? Would that be accurate? Thank you. And could you now explain to me how the notional interest rate or the 2-year public works borrowing rate differs from what everyone else would understand as the interest rate?
PWLB rate is the government borrowing rate. It's built upon gilt rates and what the government can borrow at with an appropriate premium. It used to be sort of a gilt rate plus 20 basis points, so plus 0.2%. That's how it used to be. 2 or 3 budgets ago, the PWLB was a gilt rate plus 1%, and it's moved. There's now a certainty rate that moves it as a PW rate plus 0.8%. So it's essentially set government available borrowing rate, but it's built around the government's cost of borrowing plus a margin.
And the final question for the moment, it'll all be for the moment, is that related to land values?
No, the interest rate isn't. No, it's a national government debt borrowing rate.
I beg your pardon, there was one other question I wanted to ask. At any point in time when one develops land, it accrues additional value if you seek planning permission and matters of that nature, or if you seek to put it into a strategic plan, etc., etc. Is there any way of identifying that additional value at this point? Thank you.
It was identified. Remember, this is working off of statement of accounts valuation, so it was the methodology that's shown, that's summarised on page 77, is a value which has an element of hope value, but has a very long time horizon, because at the time of this time last year, the council wasn't actively promoting through the local plan process. Obviously, all of our investment property is revalued every year. So for 12-13 accounts, there will be a different value that will take on board the current position, and this time next year there'll be a different value again, depending on where in the local plan allocation process the council is with the many down land, and further on down the line. So the value will change, and you will be able to see how that value changes, because the proposal here is that we show an opening and closing value and a valuation change, and the narrative would pick up the main reasons for that change. This value, this asset is externally valued for the council, so we would produce the information that the committee wanted that was around that narrative.
Councillor Parker.
I hope committee members will just indulge me, just because I'm going to go back on something I had it noted as a question, and I think it's been half dealt with to the sort of my own satisfaction. But on the page 77, which makes reference on the Hampshire County Council option to purchase, what basis is that? Can we understand? In other words, do they sort of say we now want to purchase? Is it sort of an option that they can call in any time, or is there a time limit on it? Or can we just have a bit more information? I know you were talking about adding some words to that, but I think it's rather relevant as to when they can, if they chose to, and one assumes they're going to once they see the value go up.
Thank you, Chair. It's an option at their ability to exercise, so they can exercise that option. I'm not sure, I can't remember off the top of my head if there is a long stop date, and if there is, it's a long stop date. So to all intents and purposes, there isn't a. Yeah, I think it's 50. It was a long. So there is a long stop date on there. And it's at the county council's discretion to exercise.
Yeah, I was going to make an observation in relation to a couple of the questions, because we've asked for a consolidated report so we get all the information that's reported in other routes back together so that we can see it in one place. What that necessarily puts on us is an onus to understand what actually the mechanisms behind this. Otherwise, we could end up putting lots and lots of notes in this. And it's right that we ask the questions now, but I think in us asking for the consolidation, we also have to sort of make sure we're up to speed with the other bits of the agreement and the options, etc. Because otherwise, this could become quite a tortuous report, which was designed to keep us updated year on year in the movement and valuation of this land. So, just making that observation that when we're asking our questions, that we are mindful as well that we keep up to date with the progress. And I know some of us are far more up to date than others, but we have that responsibility as well. So, Councillor Park, you have other questions?
No, I didn't. I'm still going to be courageous and still suggest that I think we're talking about one sentence. I don't think we're talking about paragraphs. And when we're looking at value, the terms and conditions of options have a bearing on value. So I would ask that is included. And I also think the period that the owners have the lease buyback, please.
I think that's perfectly permissible. I was just pointing out that there are times when it's appropriate and other times when we just need to recognise what we need to do as well. Yeah. I've got Councillor Leek next.
Combination of observations and questions. So, if I look at page 76, at the bottom, the historic expenditure of promotion of the land, I have read an awful lot about Hampshire County Council continuing to promote the Manydown land after 2006, when the Cabinet quite rightly took the decision, or the Council rightly took the decision not to promote it further. Not at all. No.
Can we just let
I'm a
Councillor Leek
little
ask the
surprised,
question?
therefore, that Hampshire County Council.
Can we just let Councillor Leek ask the question, please?
I am a little surprised, therefore, that Hampshire County Council incurred no costs in continuing to promote the land. So we've got 2067 through to 1112, 0. That I find a little surprising if they really were continuing to promote it. So I question whether those figures are correct. The second point is on page 77. In the first paragraph, the land is leased and classified as investment property. The valuation is conducted by external valuers. We have had Brian Barrett in front of us year after year giving the valuation. I'm not. I dispute that we've had an external valuation. We did when there was some dispute over it relatively recently, but before it was definitely our property department which was valuing it. So I question whether that is a correct statement. And I just want to clarify in my own mind on page 78 that the 4,172,000 of actual payments received comprises the interest that has been paid by the county council plus the retention of half the net income from the JMC.
In terms of, if I can help with those questions, in terms of the first question around the table on page 76, item 5, that's expenditure that can be recovered under the terms of the agreement, not all expenditure that's been incurred. So that was expenditure that was, as I understand it, expenditure that was agreed can be recovered under the terms of the agreement. But I will raise that question whether there's other expenditure that we haven't at the moment got identified, hasn't appeared in here, that can be recovered under the agreement. What this shows is agreement under the. Go on.
I was quite closely involved in the discussions at that time, and I'm almost certain that we agreed that the county would be able to recover its additional costs at the time the land was actually sold. So I'm a little surprised by that statement, but it would be helpful if you could clarify that.
I think that was the 121 that's in there, and as I say, I'll come back and clarify whether there's some additional expenditure that, as we update this each year, will get added in.
So if Kevin, you can help us down on the external valuers at page 77.
External, yes, McCapson's quite correct. This wasn't attempted to say it's been valued by external values every year. It's currently valued by external valuers, and well, it could be amended so that it does say that. That was the intention of the wording, and we can. Apart from the last 2 years.
Councillor Keating.
My understanding, Chair, is that there is a requirement under the agreement for a 5-year rent review. And it's at that point that the external valuation takes place. Thank you.
Okay, if Kevin's allowed to answer the final question that Councillor Leake had.
And the final question is yes, the 4172. That's the it shows the net. Sorry, that's the total income received from the interest and the rent, their share of the rental, that's been passed across, which leads to a net option cost of 4.2 million that's shown at the bottom.
Sorry, again, just so that members can understand, which is why the capital sum has declined from 5 million to 4.2, because the share of the net income attributable to Hampshire County Council has been used to reduce the capital sum outstanding. And I think it would be enormously helpful if that was actually noted.
Sorry, Chair, we'll add some explanatory notes. I mean, that's come across quite clearly from the committee. That's good feedback. We'll make a bit more, some more detailed notes across the elements, but certainly, again, under that one, we can make that very clear.
Councillor Cubitt next.
A couple of points. I would like it noted that we should seek to possibly apply some of the monies from our investment bond portfolio to closing out Hampshire County Council's unpaid option in order for us to own the asset in its entirety, given that we've held the risk for the last 17...
Councillor Cubitt, I'm trying to work out how that's a question related to this report. I understand the validity of the point you're making, but in relation to how this reflects in this report.
Well, I'll tell you why, because it's another valuation, because we've been carrying the risk of this asset. They have not owned it. just as a point of record, Councillor Reid corrected me in full council 2 years ago and said that Hampshire County Council owned 50% of the option. They didn't own it. They signed a JDPA which indicated that at a future stage they might exercise their option and pay us the 5 million. I'm talking about Hampshire County, not us. And therefore, there is another valuation here, which is that we repay Hampshire County their 5 million and own it outright so that we get the total 50% uplift in the development.
Yeah, I'm not at all disagreeing with what you're suggesting as an optional proposal. What I'm trying to work out is what this paper is about is consolidating an existing current reporting mechanisms and bits of information about. Hang on, let me finish a second. And what we're trying to do is consolidate the existing reporting information and give feedback to Kevin's lead officer in terms of what report we want to see. We can only report on things that have happened. What you're proposing is something that might happen or something you'd like to take. And I don't say that's invalid or not. I just don't see how it relates to this paper at this point in time.
I tell you why it does, because at the moment we own. Okay, I didn't phrase it properly. At the moment we own 50% of the uplift. Okay. Hampshire County Council doesn't own 50% of the uplift. We own 50% of the uplift until they exercise the option.
Yeah.
And there isn't a table here which says that actually the value of the 10 million spend to us, the council, is X, unless Hampshire County Council exercise their option. It's not a correct reflection of the valuation.
I can see that what you're looking for is a reflection of the table of ownership. Yes, okay, which helps to relate to point 7. Yeah, that's. Can you help us?
Hesitate to say whether you think it'd be help. I understand what you're saying, except that there is very clearly a legal agreement that the council has, a contractual arrangement that the council has in terms of the option, which has a material impact on the valuation. The statement that's in section 6 makes it clear that the valuation is done with the various contractual commitments that are there. That is the value. What we carry in our accounts at the moment is the value of the 50%. So the value will change at the point at which the county council exercise their option. But what I'm saying is that I believe that the value that we show in the accounts is a correct value in that it's valued with all of the relevant legal implications taken account of, or the contractual arrangements taken account of.
Misunderstood your valuation here, because then what you're saying is that we're going to develop roughly 19 acres. No, not 19 acres. A partial development of 16. So you saying that we're building 32 acres? Is that? Because normally it's a million an acre. So on the valuation that you've got there, that would suggest that 32 acres are being developed. Is that my correct interpretation?
I'd have to go back and look at the detailed valuation statement. But remember, this was a value done at this time last year, so it was done on a development outside the local plan time horizon. So there was significant risk and significant discounting back of values. So rather than getting to, which I haven't got the detailed information to be able to give you a proper answer on the detail, this is a report about the type of information that members will get to explain the valuations. So we've already said that we want some additional notes, and we will try and flesh out the valuation note as well as part of the future reporting, but it will be linked to the annual revaluation.
Okay, I appreciate your answers. I hear what you're saying, and whilst other members might believe that I'm being fanciful, if we were running a private company, we might now be looking to see whether we don't need any longer to be governed by the JDPA because they cease to exercise their option within a certain time frame, and therefore the rights to the 50% with the Manydown company revert to us.
Councillor Harvey, do you want to come in on this point?
Yes, okay, thank you. I'm just conscious that a lot of this, Kevin, from the way you've described, is in a sense, to have a report that is full at the next meeting would be very useful, because I'd like to see the methodology that's been spoken about work through, because I agree in the sense of valuations, it's what valuation and what are we using as our baselines and our figures, because I genuinely think, and I agree with others around the table, have some scepticism about the County Council's approach and their, how to describe this now, the way they're going about it in the context of the best interests of this authority and the best interests of our residents. I can understand why they're doing it, because they're operating it from their property perspective and so on. But I want to see a document that gives us a surety of what our value is based upon our actual ownership, as opposed to what would be then the future options flowed through if the agreements are fulfilled. So there's a number of things that I'm not explaining myself clearly enough as I'd like to, but what I want to see is the trail and understand that. And I appreciate where Councillor Cupid is coming from, because it may well then point to a decision this council may want to take, because the figures give you the clarity to see what the County Council is actually up to.
Yeah, and I think my point was not to dismiss Councillor Cooper's suggestion, but actually it can't be determined in this place. And I think from the perspective of this paper, it was to try and give you a framework today to say, is this the sort of information that we can consolidate in this area? Kevin's able to pick up the feedback that we're providing in terms of where different notes can be expanded, and I'll run through those when we sum up. And then I think the intention is to bring this to this committee in its first populated form in the early autumn. Is that in September or is that?
Yeah, it depends on either in June with the draft statement of accounts, depending on where we are, or in September with the final statement of accounts. It would sit alongside the statement of account information, and that's coming to this committee in two goes: draft in June, final in September.
I think from a member's point of view, I mean, forgive me if I'm putting task upon the officers here, but considering what we've all gone through in respect of this, I would like to see something in June, so that I've got something to hold on to as a member to understand and appreciate, as well as in September when you do the final. Even if it's in draft, it would be most beneficial to us, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's a point already been made by the committee, that we'd like to see the accounts in draft and financial information in draft before we then have to deal with signing it off in September. So yeah, it's a useful point. Okay, I've got Councillor Mitchell next.
Yeah, I'll go back to simple-minded questions here. On page 78 in the table showing the interest levels, this is showing it up to the end of 10/11, because that was in last year's accounts, presumably. So if we were looking at it currently, we'd show up to the end of, or if we're looking at it next month or whenever, we'd say up to the end of 12/13. Yes, there'll be 2 more years worth in it. Yeah, okay. That was all. I was trying to work out the difference between the two sums, but having looked at the amounts in the table 2, multiply them by 10, does come to the difference between 4.2 million and 3.3 million, which is quite neat, as if it had been the same every year. Well, the other thing, which is more a comment, is one wonders what extra would have been done, other than possibly developing the land, but what extra, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, £600,000 that was spent jointly between 2001 to the end of 4/5 and halfway through 6. It's interesting to know what was achieved with all that money, because I was just to admit guilt on this, in case anybody wants to throw any nasturtiums. I was a member of council at the time we made the decision in 2006, which, by the way, was legal according to the court. It was to, yes, and my motivation, as I understood.
Can you just ask a question?
As I understood what the motivation was, well, a lot of people make comments, and I make a comment. My motivation was that I couldn't understand why we kept spending all this money every year, and until such times we decided what to do and when, we should not spend any more money. And that was the rationale behind the decision, as far as I was aware.
Councillor Cubitt, you have a question?
I have to reply to that, but I'm not going to name names. And the answer is that monies was spent on the infrastructural evaluation.
I was looking for.
I'm
a question.
I'm talking to the chair. I'm not talking to any named member.
And I'm looking for a question.
Yes, and I'm just informing the group that the monies were spent on huge infrastructural analysis and development plans, which was a legal onus on the council because the council had purchased the land under the Town and Country Planning Act for the purposes of development. So therein lies the answer to some of my fellow members who seemed to be a bit confused when they were in charge but not knowing what was actually going on.
Okay, thank you for the summing up. If I can pull together the points made then, because I don't have... If we can have a summation on comments at paper F, we've agreed we would want to expand the explanation at note 7, read the option to purchase at 50%. We're going to add a footnote, read the details of the option to purchase criteria timeline to exercise, also at item 7. We want to add to the minutes a comment that the reference in 6 to the external valuation, conductor of external valuation each year, in fact relates to the past 2 years, and prior to that it's been internal valuation. We want to annotate to the table at page 78, again in item 7 of the report, the distinction repayment of capital value and notional interest, and expand the valuation explanation at item 6 to provide expand the valuation explanation at item 6. And then finally, the agreed way forward is to provide a draft population of this report in June, and then a final one alongside the accounts in September. The one I'd missed is under item 5, to determine whether there's any additional items of expenditure on promotion of land, which was asked for, so that can be updated in the June paper. Councillor Parker, did I miss something?
Yes, I think so, Chair, because it sort of sits at the bottom of item 6, and that was also just to give a briefest of explanation with regard to the landlord's option to buy back.
Sorry, I thought I'd covered that. But
No, you just said,
okay.
The counties.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Councillor Keating?
I have in my head the fact that we're not recording expenditure which is not recoverable. Am I correct in saying that? And if so, should we not be recording it?
All we're trying to do here is to record what expenditure that can be recoverable in terms of the agreement. So any expenditure, sorry, that's the requirements of the various contractual arrangements that the council's entered into. That there are certain categories of expenditure that can be recovered from the gross proceeds before they're split out, and this is a record of doing that. And so we're identifying all of that as time and cost that can form part of that analysis, and that's what will be reported here. We're not reporting any other time that's being spent generally on many down management that isn't a recoverable expense, other than its expenditure that's part of the council's ongoing revenue budget, or the council's if it's Hampshire County Council. So this is about specifically meeting the requirements of the agreement, and also in terms of value for money, so that we're making sure that we can reduce the gross receipt for the appropriate expenditure.
So I've no doubt that what Kevin is saying is accurate and correct. But what I am saying effectively is we were simply asking for a report which brought all the expenditure together. And we're now getting a report which leaves out some expenditure. Now, that's the only issue in my head. This is not a question of who can recover what or whatever. This is, you can spend £10,000 and you can recover £10,000, and then you spend another £1,000 and you can't recover it. I understand the distinction, but I was hoping, as a member of the Audit Committee, that the report of all the expenditure and income would be inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I probably haven't been as clear as I ought to have been on that then. We are obviously, within this report, we're also showing all of the expenditure on the JMC. So that's expenditure that isn't recoverable under the agreement. We're also proposing to show all of the promotional expenditure that the council has undertaken and that Hampshire County Council has undertaken. So in my eyes, we are showing all of the expenditure that we can reliably and accurately report. And so we are not just showing one type of expenditure.
Councillor Leake.
Could I just seek clarification what Kevin just said? I thought I heard you say that the expenditure of the JMC couldn't be recovered. And yet in this table it says it's expenditure which can be recovered.
All I was trying to say, without getting to the detail, which I haven't got the detail with me, so I don't want, is that we are trying to show all of the relevant expenditure in terms of the JMC, promotional expenditure, and a record of the expenditure that will ultimately be deducted from the gross proceeds. So we're trying to give a full picture. That's what I was trying to explain.
Okay, members, so with the addition of that feedback and comments, we are expecting the first full population of this report with your additions to come to us in draft in June, and then subsequently in September, along with the initially draft and then final accounts. Okay, that concludes paper F. Takes us on to paper G. Can I ask Melanie O'Sullivan to introduce paper G for us?
Certainly, Chair. A copy of the paper is at page 79 of the documents that you have in front of you, and I should just say at the commencement of this meeting that I'm acting this role in the absence of Chris Guy, so I am currently acting acting monitoring officer. Just a very brief summary of the report that was before you, members. In terms of the process that has been undertaken since the code was previously approved by full council, I have met with representatives from the Standards Review meeting, which was the independent persons and independent members, and started a review of this process. As part of that, we looked at other councils' code of conducts and arrangements and tried to find out what was best practice. Following that meeting, documents there were then prepared for the Constitutional Working Party, who met on the 25th of March 2013 to consider the amendments to the code and the arrangements. In terms of the main amendments to the code, these are set out at paragraph 3.8 of my report, but I will just expand on those slightly. The main amendment is in relation to interests. Currently, under the Code of Conduct, we have disclosure of pecuniary interests, and these are prescribed by the legislation. The other interest, which is currently under the code, is prejudicial interest in relation to overview and scrutiny committee. This proved difficulty in advising advice, especially in circumstances where members felt that they'd got some type of personal interest under the old regime, but there was nothing prescribed in terms of what the members should do where they hold that type of interest. So in order to fill that gap, a new interest has been added, and this interest is referred to as other interest. And this interest falls under paragraph 9 of the codes, and if members want to see, that's at page 103 of the papers that you have before you. And the idea of this, for those members who recall it, is that this draws in back from the old, what used to be personal interest under the old code. And it sets out the definition there. And all it requires members to do is declare it. It doesn't prevent you from voting, it doesn't prevent you from taking part in the debate, but it concurs with the openness and transparency that's required in accordance with the code. The two other main amendments to the Code of Conduct is gifts and hospitality hadn't been included in the previous Code of Conduct. This was in the original general code that was prescribed, but for some reason got lost when we approved it again at full council. And again, the idea is here, and I think Councillor Keaton is a spokesperson for this, is that you're purely required to declare it. It doesn't mean you can't have it, it just means that you have to declare it. So now there's a requirement that you have to declare any gifts and hospitality over £25, and that's set out in the code. The other thing that the code was lacking previously is there was no reference to dispensations. It was set out in the legislation, but as far as council is concerned, there was nothing for them to refer to in relation to dispensations. So the code just sets out the grounds that a dispensation could be attained for. And that's set out within the amended documents. In terms of the arrangements for dealing with the code, as is always the case, when you write a procedure, it's only when you start to work that procedure that you can learn from it and improve on that procedure. And I hope that's what we've sought to do through the process, is improve on that procedure that we've got in place. Main amendments relate to, we've changed definitions to tidy up the document, hopefully to make it a little bit easier to read. In terms of decision notices, the document was silent really on the status of a decision notice, and it's now clear that a decision notice, the starting point is available for public inspection unless it contains confidential information. It was just considered that this dealt with the openness and transparency that's required in accordance with the Code of Conduct. Another major amendment is in relation to formal settlement. Under the old code, the complainant had to agree to the informal settlement, and if they didn't agree, the complaint would be progressed down the usual routes. What we've done here, a key aim of the code is informal settlement. If you can get all parties to agree, then that's a better outcome for all concerned. But what we've done now is, if the Deputy Monitoring Officer or the independent member who determines the complaint is of the view that the informal settlement is reasonable, and therefore the complainant in refusing the informal settlement agreement has been unreasonable, then the matter will end there. The Deputy Monitoring Officer or independent member, in consultation with the independent person, will then say, we've looked at this informal settlement arrangement, we're happy it's a reasonable settlement, and therefore the complaint will not be progressed any further. The other major amendments are in relation to councillor versus councillor complaints, and this is at paragraph 10 and 11 of the arrangements. And again, this has just been provided for clarity. Deadlines have been changed slightly, and that sort of information. A common theme throughout the meeting was that we've got a code and we've got arrangements, but we've got no guidance to support members interpreting that code. So at the Constitutional Working Party, a draft guidance note was circulated just to see if this was the type of thing that councillors were looking for, and it came back that yes, that was, and a copy of a guidance note is at page 150 of the papers that you've got before you. And the idea is that this guidance note can be upgraded and changed from the lessons learned from other councillors and other issues that other councillors face. But the other thing to get across as well is that the monitoring officer is always there to provide advice to councillors on an individual basis. So I don't propose to go through in any further detail, but obviously I'm happy to answer any questions, Chair, that members may have.
Thank you for that introduction. Councillor Harvey. Sorry. No, please. No.
No, apologies, that's just a blank page. It does follow on, luckily.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Melanie. I appreciate the work that you and your team have gone into on this, because this is extensive, and I know you brought it to CWP for it to be looked at, and had a lot of comments there as well from all around the table. My question relates to section 10, and it relates to page 118, and really it flows from that meeting to where I think the process potentially is now set out. My problem with section 10 at the moment in relation to councillor complaints, for the matter, parish and so on, is that there is no sense of appeal. There's nowhere you can go. In effect, if you are the complainant or you're the subject member, in essence, you get the report and that's it. There is no right to say, but hang on a minute, I disagree with this, or you haven't answered all the questions I asked in the complaint, you've not covered this. There is nowhere to go. And I think that's a fundamental mistake or a problem. Whether we can address it or not within the context of the new standards law, I don't know. If we can, I'd like us to try to do so.
In terms of the comment made, this is the council's code, and other than being governed by the Nolan principles, it's open for us to include whatever was in this code. The only thing I can do is provide you with the background as to why it is that way in the first place, and I wasn't personally dealing with this back then, but I think the whole provision in relation to councillor versus councillor complaints was the idea that these would be dealt with more quickly and justly, and that because they were being determined by an independent member as appointed by this committee, that there wasn't really an appeal route that could be taken, because any appeal would take it back to an officer level. And that was why I think in the original instance there was no appeal provision in there, because the whole idea is that your determination is by somebody independent. As I said, there's nothing to preclude you in the legislation putting in some sort of appeal arrangement in there, but the reason for not doing it was purely the fact that it's been determined by an independent member.
I think in terms of natural justice, this is an issue, and it kind of comes out of experience as well, in the sense of just thinking this through and seeing the process. If you have that situation where you have an independent member who is selected by no process involving either the complainant or the subject member, and they do their piece of work and they come to a recommendation that doesn't answer all of the questions that are in the original complaint, there's nowhere for you to go. If they come to a decision that you fundamentally disagree with as the subject member or the complainant, there is nowhere for you to go. And in a sense, all you're left with is making another complaint on the same thing and hope that you get a different independent person. And in a sense, that's silly. That's absolutely silly, because either the process has an ability to say, look, I disagree and I want this to be reviewed, and that should involve some sense of independence and some sense of the other than being an officer. And I think I would be concerned about it being landed on the shoulders of an officer. And I don't think that should be your role as the monitoring officer in particular. It should be to a panel that is able to review and see if there is any justification for the complaint being, seen in the way that it's seen by the subject member or the complainant.
I mean, the only point I will raise is that through the whole process, this point has never been raised. So point is new at this meeting today. In terms of the whole process, that's the difference between a councillor versus councillor complaint and an officer versus councillor complaint. The officer versus councillor complaint, I should say officer or member of the public. That part of the complaint process does have the hearing procedure, but the thought process was that for councillor versus councillor complaints, we need to deal with these swiftly, have a quick resolution, and the officer time and involvement in the hearing of a standards subcommittee is considerable, and that it would be hoped that it could be dealt with in accordance with 10, and there should be no need for that to go on.
I totally respect that I'm raising this here and now, and I appreciate that I've not done that in a sense, and I've not spoken to you about it before now, because it's been this meeting, seeing these papers and it's coming from my experience. So this is me seeing the new system in action and saying, hang on a minute, there's something here that has come to my attention in the last week, actually, this last 7 days. So in that sense, I'm saying, hang on a minute, because of my experience, and all I'm asking for, and I don't know how we do this, is that issue is considered somehow, somewhere, because right here, right now, I've got alarm bells ringing in terms of my experience of the process.
Oh, okay,
Before
we go any further, I'm just going to say, Councillor Keating, did you want to come in on this particular issue, or was it a different issue? Yeah, because just hold the thought a second. Let's hear from Councillor Keating.
I've got even wider experience than anyone else in this room with this rubbish, right? Councillor on councillor complaints, etc. Can I just say that on each complaint that was ever made against me, I was always found totally exonerated. However, the torture and the nightmare that went on for 3 years was totally disproportionate. Totally disproportionate. In any process where complaints are dealt with, no matter where we are in this country, I believe the standard of automatically having an appeals process is a well-established standard. I recognise and understand and appreciate the points that Melanie is making in relation to member against members being different. But they are also equally the same in terms of reputation. Reputations can be destroyed on member versus member complaints as they can be destroyed from other complaints. And they can be destroyed legitimately, i.e. the member was wrong, or they can be destroyed irrespective of whether the member was wrong or not. So I do believe that and I accept that I could have made this point earlier. I do accept that. Put my hands up to that. But I do believe that there is a potential mechanism by which we could resolve this. If the original complaint goes to an independent member, and we've agreed that in a sense, if an appeal mechanism, which would be the equivalent of one paragraph of this document, would be that an appeal could be put to two alternative independent members. If you see what I mean, not create a monster.
I think we were coming to the same
or
thought
a
in a way.
nightmare.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's workable. Just trying to think this through. So we're not effectively going to Appendix 1, which is a full-blown subcommittee hearing, but what we put in there is an appeal provision, probably similar to the appeal provisions to the monitoring officer in relation to the MO, but on this one it'll be to an independent member. I'm not sure about the requirement of 2, happy for 2, it's a matter for the committee, and there can just be an appeal to that independent member who then reviews what's been undertaken and then considers that appeal.
The less isolated that independent members are, the better. Thank you.
Okay, well, we have the ability to make recommendations on this, and I'll find a way of summing up that up a bit later. Do we... a new...
On that one, and those, because we do have experience where they've been swapped over, where you've had a case go halfway, and you've passed from one to another, haven't you, in that sense of movement across. So it needs to be sort of continuous.
Chair, I completely accept that there should be only one independent member involved in a complaint, and that on an appeal basis that person should have no previous involvement in the complaint they're reviewing.
Okay, I didn't have any other... Oh, I do. Right, I've got all together now. So, right, Councillor Mitchell, then Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, Melanie, I'm very grateful that you put in the 2 versions, the track changes version and the updated complete version. Very helpful indeed. I was slightly foxed by the fact that C and D interchanged the process so that the track changes version came after the version. It took me 30 seconds to work that out, so I wasted 30 seconds of my life there. Well, I'm very upset about that. There are, however, 1 or 2 places where I think it becomes suddenly a bit sort of legalistic. But before I get to that, and I'm going to the amended version rather than the track changes version, if that's okay. Page 106, paragraph 15.2, little 6, the final thing there. It seemed to me any dispensation for something would be a duration up to a maximum of 4 years, and it just struck me as a long time in life. And don't answer the question now, but at some stage when I've finished wittering on, if there's a good reason why that is, but 4 years is a particular time, I'd be interested in knowing how we arrive at that date. Then I had a few things about the language or the text. I can't find one of them. I'll come back to it. Where I think it gets a bit legalistic is Appendix 1. The rest of it's easy to read. But in Appendix 1 we suddenly start putting in things that are standard in legal documents, but in this case don't all appear to be needed. For example, at the beginning we say the Localism Act 2001 brackets the Act, and then we in the interpretation explain the Act means the Localism Act, although we've just said that. And interestingly, in the body of the text I can't see any reference to the Act. So I don't think we need to say the Localism Act 2011, the Act. We can just cross out the Act and cross out the definition. And then we get into the relevant authority under sponsorship. It first appears several times. And then when we look at it, it says the relevant authority means Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council. Why not just say Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council or the Council? Well, it can't be, because the definition of it is that it means Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council. That's the definition. On the next page, where all these terms are defined. I'll just go through these and I'm trying not to nitpick. I'm just trying to, where I struggle to understand it, I'm just thinking some new member might struggle to understand it. And then we have M, And this looks as if it's been derived from some other source. Any expenses incurred by M in carrying out duties as a member. And then when we look at it, it says M means a member of the relevant authority. Well, if M only means a member of the increases by the member, brackets, of Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council, we can then say, instead of M, the member. I'm used to the prayer book where it says M or N, you see, so I spell M's. The body, we then get to the relevant authority, and I did think about whether it's a parish, but this actually is specific to Basingstoke and Dean. And then relevant person. Well, relevant person appears somewhere in corporate tenancy is the first place I could find it, and then it appears again in the next bit. The landlord is the relevant authority. Well, the landlord is Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council. The tenant is a body in which the relevant person is the member of Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council. So I just feel that most of this interpretation could simply be removed by using the language that it implies, actually using the language in the text, without changing any of the sense at all. I'll pause at that point.
Okay.
No, thank you.
Before we get a response, it's 5 o'clock and I'm minded to move standing orders in that order that we can continue. I'll give some thought then into how much longer we go on this afternoon, and I'll have that discussion, but I'll leave that thought with you for now and allow Melanie to respond to Councillor Mitchell.
The 2 points that you've raised, both points just in relation to this dispensations and Appendix 1, are direct lifts from the legislation. So you're right to say that they're very legalistic. In terms of the 4 years dispensation, that's taken directly from the legislation, that's not prescribed by us. I take on board all your comments in relation to Appendix 1 because it literally is just a copy and paste of the legislation, and I'm happy to get rid of definitions that aren't required. I think, for example, it'd be useful to keep definitions such as land and body and those types of things. But in terms, Chair, if that's the view of the committee, I think the amendments proposed are more than reasonable.
Yeah, I think generally we all like to keep things as simple and easy read as possible, so if that makes sense. Right. Do you have further comments, Councillor Mitchell? Shall we come back to you then? Because I've got... okay, I've got Councillor Parker next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm referring to paragraph 5, which is on 113, and paragraph 6 to start with, if I may. In relation to the independent persons, I'd like to ask, how are they selected, please? What is the process?
The position is advertised in the Basingstoke Gazette as a job, but the legislation sets out the requirements that we have to do. The previous independent persons are then, I think it's Councillor Harvey gone? Oh, Councillor Harvey, I think, was on the interview panel. There was a selection of ARGA members who were on the interview panel for those independent persons. They then make their final selection, which comes as a recommendation back to committee, and then the appointment is made following the agreement of the committee. I do have the names of those members in the terms of office, if you would like that.
Thank you. Then I would suggest that that's incorporated in here, because in 6 you make a note specifically that the independent members are appointed by the Audit, Governance and Accounts Committee, and so you're indicating in one part how they're appointed, and then not in the other. I think we'd need to be able to have that set down. That's the process. And I wanted just to ask there's a section of sort of criteria under item 5 which says who they can't be, and there's no eligibility criteria under item 6. Be nice to know on what basis that they are selected. They have a very important role in this whole process.
Chair, if I may, I take on board all the issues of raised, but I'm not sure that the arrangements for dealing with complaints is the place where we want to be setting out processes to do with appointment of independent persons and independent members. I'm happy to bring to this committee a separate report there you agree the process for appointment, but I'm just not sure that this is what people will be sent when they submit a complaint to us.
I think it's just sufficient to reference where the process exists, because I think we've gone through the process quite recently anyway, certainly to appoint the independent members. So if there's a cross-reference there, so that should people need to refer to it, if they can, that would probably suffice, because that would deal with both the process and eligibility. Councillor Parker.
I disagree on the point the officer's making, Chair, because if a person who wishes to challenge the member that's hearing them, or they may wish to make a point at that point in time, it's transparency and it's informative, and we shouldn't shy away from that. And I have another question before you finish there, please.
Yeah. Would you be happy with the reference to where the information is there?
Yes, I would, in principle, but it's the sort of the desire. It would like also to see the desire of it being incorporated in the process.
I'm happy to make a reference. It's not in any way not being open and transparent. It's just the case for the terms of this, the complainant will receive it, and the members and persons have already been appointed through that process. So there's nothing that a complainant could do to amend that process or do anything to do with the fact that that independent person's been appointed. That being said, I have no issue with referencing to our procedure for appointments of independent persons and independent members.
Councillor Keating next. Sorry, Councillor Parker, you did say yes. Apologies.
Right. Thank you. It's on page 117. I don't quite follow the order of the paragraphs under section 10. The placing of, in particular, paragraph 10.1.5. And I have a slight question about 10.1.7. I would have thought that you would be noting that the monitoring officer would provide the independent member with the information they need to determine the complaint before they review it and decide that it's frivolous.
I agree, that's a fair comment, that paragraph 10.1.5 should be moved up and become 10.1.2. Oh, sorry.
Thank you for that. And I sort of then take that suggestion just a little bit further to 10.1.7. I'm not quite sure where that sits. It's in the same regard.
That does usually fall when you've given the subject member an opportunity to respond, because it may be that then you require additional information. So until you've had a response from the complainant and the subject member, you don't really know what further information you're going to require at that point.
Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. My point is on page 106, number 15, the final reference, the duration of the dispensation. Now, we are all normally elected for a 4-year period of office. That cycle of elections is regularly interrupted by change of the boundaries. So, on 2 occasions in my terms of office, I've actually served for 2 years rather than 4, because the boundaries restarted the clock in terms of time. So, but some of us actually had to do it, as distinct from putting bits of paper through one letterbox. Can I just continue? Can I just continue? I believe the intention of 4 years was intended to reflect the potential for a term of office. But I believe it to be much more realistic to say for the duration of your existing term of office. Because then any dispensation wouldn't carry over into a new term of office. Thank you.
like I say, I think we were told earlier it was lift from legislation, so what discretion, what discretion do we have?
Yeah.
Yep, no, I know.
Chair, yes, it is lifted from legislation. It might be useful, Councillor Keating, if we could discuss this point on the next report, because that deals with the procedure for dealing with dispensations, or is that the code is saying that it may be granted for 4 years, and that's what the legislation states we can do. We can grant it for 4 years. The next report looks at how we go about granting those, so maybe it might be relevant to the next report, perhaps, to make that comment.
Yep, we will pick it up at the next report. We've got Councillor Leake and then Councillor Mitchell.
I was a little disturbed to hear that the only invitation to become an independent member was through the Gazette. You have to be pretty narrow-minded to read the Gazette. No, I didn't. I said you have to be well, I did say that, you're right.
Just get your question out, Joe.
The point is that not everybody reads the Gazette. There must be another method of getting people to put their names forward, like having it on our website, for instance. Do we do that? I mean, a very limited number of people read the Gazette because it's largely rubbish.
Chair, could I disassociate myself from this member's attack on a reputable organisation?
Let's go with what we have and ask. Let's ask the officer to respond to the substantive question, not the comments you all want to make about it, please.
I'm happy for members to feed into where that should be advertised. In terms of when we're looking at appointing, we're not looking at appointing now until 2014, but I am happy for members to make further suggestions of where that advertisement should be.
Well, regardless of my opinion of the paper, I mean, in Councillor Mitchell's ward, I doubt anybody reads the Gazette. You may, you may be the reader, but it is a Newbury town paper. And some of the editions don't come into the rural areas at all.
Okay, Councillor Garden, you have something on this point?
I do. One possibility for publicising it is to send it to the various parish clerks so they can put on their notice boards.
I'm afraid that won't work because we're looking at an independent member here and we already have the parish representatives and it's slightly separate, but I don't know whether they could have contact with the community if that's the effect you're thinking.
Sorry, what I was saying was they can put it on their parish notice boards to inform the parish.
Okay, so we've got some good suggestions there, thank you. Councillor Mitchell, you're next.
Thank you, Chairman. Going to page 106. Oh, we've been there, sorry, done that one. 107, don't need to do that one. 113. Right. On the deputy monitoring officers acting as the monitoring officer, blah, blah, blah. So where the monitoring officer has a conflict of interest and is unable to participate, should that read or is unable to participate? Because there might be other reasons why the monitoring officer can't participate in a timely fashion. Might be on leave or lots of other reasons. Force majeure, for example. So I just wonder whether that, because conflict of interest and is unable to participate would simply read conflict of interest, stop. But if there are other reasons, it says or is for some other reason unable to participate. I'll just do the other one as well. Okay, which is right opposite. Fortunately, on page 114, we've got the monitoring, quite rightly address the monitoring officer address by role rather than personality, and then we say email chrisguy@basingstoke.gov.uk. Now, it's my view that for all external purposes and for most purposes of this nature, the right thing to do, normal way to do things in organisations, is to have an email address which is the office. So the email address ought to be monitoringofficer@basingstoke.gov.uk, which automatically goes to the monitoring officer for the time being in that role. And the other thing on the same page is you've got this enormous URL, which most people would never be able to type correctly and might not have a document they could copy it from. And we do have a scheme in the council for short, meaningful URLs. which then sip out to whatever is the URL which is inclined to change. So I do suggest that for this purposes, public purposes, that should say basingstoke.gov.uk monitoring officer or something similar, or code conduct if it's code conduct, and miss out all the rest. And IT can tell you how they do that. Some cunning process which we introduced.
Chair, just responding to the points raised, I think in relation to paragraph 4.2, the amendment to or, I think is a good amendment as long as all members are agreed. I think I based it on experience, but you're right, it's good to be open. In terms of the monitoring officer email address, this is something that was raised by the corporate director prior to today's meeting, but I hadn't set up a general monitoring officer email address, but I take on board those comments and will ensure that I do that. In terms of the URL, I'm afraid I didn't have a clue that was just taken from the arrangements previously, but you've now educated me and I shall go away and seek a shorter URL.
Just for the record, in saying that about having an email address monitoring officer, that's nothing to do with the individual at all. It's a general rule that we should apply to all outside communications with the council.
I think it also helps in terms of reviewing the policy. It makes things a lot easier in terms of that if it's just an officer provision rather than a name.
Okay, members, that's the end of my list. So, Councillor Mitchell.
Issue, which was to do again with readability, I think, because if people have to stop to understand what it means, they're not going to get there. I can't. I'll send you a note. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much.
Must be in the other half of the paper.
Okay.
I've flagged it up all over, but...
Okay, I'm just going to sum up then, members, so we see where we are. In the order in which they were raised, rather than the order in which they occur in the document. So for section 10, the first point raised was that there is no right of appeal. And I should precede this by saying these are recommendations we are making to council in considering adoption of this this paper. So section 10, we recognise there's no right of appeal. We're not comfortable with this and would rather there is some level of appeal, and the suggestion is that it becomes for councillor upon councillor complaints, an independent member hears it and then it is a right of appeal to an independent member, and the suggestion is 2 independent members should then hear that appeal. At section 5 and 6, we should reference consistently the processes of appointment and eligibility criteria for the appointment of independent members. Currently, there's inconsistency between the 2 paragraphs and insufficient detail in terms of how people are appointed, and it would be useful information for someone, if they wish to use this process, to understand who might be appointed and how they're appointed. In terms of 10.1.5, we've agreed that should move up to 10.1.2 to help a more logical flow in the process as currently cited. We'll come back to discussion of dispensations. We then had a comment about the advertisement of appointments for independent persons, and accepted that whilst the Gazette is currently in use, we should look at a wider circulation which could include, and I think the website was mentioned, parish notice boards were mentioned, but again it's just the general point that we would like to see a wider circulation to attract the widest possible inclusion of members. I was trying to sum up
Publish 7 days a week.
with my editorial license as chair, thank you. At 4.2, we would add or to make sure that when someone is unavailable, the monitoring officer is unavailable. And then picking up the latter 2 points about the clarity of access and information, the email addresses should relate to the office or the post, not the individual officers, and that we should look for a shorter use of the URL to encourage people to actually use it rather than get lost in typing long addresses that perhaps then don't go anywhere because they've mistyped them. Did I miss anything, folks? No? Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
And the Newbury
and-
Weekly
and-
News and the Racing Gazette.
Yes, and indeed, yes, well, okay. If I can ask you to pop your light off, Councillor Mitchell, then I can ask officers to introduce paper H. Thank you.
Paper H is at page 152 of the papers that you have before you, and this relates to the authority to grant dispensations. Previously, full council have delegated this function to the Audit, Governance and Accounts Committee, and my job was to go away and try and find a procedure that's going to be quick and effective to allow this to be dealt with. In coming to my conclusions, I've again reviewed other authorities' procedures, and I've also entered discussions with the current independent members that we have here at the Borough. The arrangement for dispensations seek to maintain the independent approach that we have in accordance with the code and arrangements. So the process looks at having independent members determine dispensation applications. The grounds for a dispensation, as set out in my report at paragraph 3.3, are prescribed by the legislation. A copy of the procedure proposed is at page 158 of the documentation, and it sets out the powers that they have there, and they may grant or refuse an application. Reference to the 4-year rule is referred to, but obviously they might decide to grant the dispensation just for one particular meeting or for a shorter period if they so wish, but the maximum as prescribed by the legislation is 4 years. I'm happy again to take any questions.
Councillor Keating first.
Thank you, Chair. I come back to the point I made earlier about the length of the granting of the dispensation. What I'm suggesting is should be that the dispensation may be granted normally for the remainder of the term of office, because the term of office is variable, or more particularly, for a meeting or a period, or a different period, a lesser period, should I say.
If you pop your light off for me, Councillor Keating.
Pardon?
If you pop your light off.
Beg your pardon.
The relevant reference to this in the procedure is on page 160, and at the moment it says the dispensation may be granted for one or more particular meeting or for a period not exceeding 4 years. So if it's agreed by members, I am happy to have in there that this may be the what's the word you need? Remaining term of office.
Pardon, it might be necessary to have absolute clarity, to have a little comment at the end of that paragraph. No dispensation would flow over 2 terms of office. You couldn't cross that boundary line, if you see what I mean.
So it flows with the term, not the individual as such. Yeah, okay. Councillor Cubitt, you were next.
Yes, 2 things. What's the difference between an independent person and an independent member?
An independent member is the old independent members that run the Standards Committee. An independent person is a statutory requirement under the legislation. This committee or full council chose to retain our independent members because of the knowledge that they wanted to keep them. So we've incorporated a process with both sets of individuals.
I remember that. So do we have 8 then?
I can just confirm the current membership. We have 4 independent members and we have 3 independent persons.
Brilliant, thank you. And then just one last question. You've made a number of references to the fact that you benchmarked us and our process with other authorities. Could you possibly tell us which authorities you have benchmarked our proposed amendments to?
Anything under the power of Google. Winchester City, Hampshire County Council. I think I circulated something at the Constitution Working Party from Medway Council. Dartmoor, I think, was another one I looked at. I did look at quite a lot because there's quite a variation in the code, so I can't give you every exact one I looked at, but I looked at quite a few.
Supplementary to that, it's just that I know from Laura and conversations I've had with Laura, there is a prescribed group of councils that we consider to be our yeah.
Sorry, perhaps I can just help you. Yes, Councillor Cuby, you're referring to the family group there. Councils of a similar composition, depending on how you perm a set of indicators. But the list Melanie has just mentioned includes a list, you remember, members, when we had our informal meeting, I'd sought advice from the LGA on councils of best practice, and I shared that list with Melanie, and some of the names on that are the names that she's just read out. So I'm fairly comfortable. We've taken a broad look at a range of councils across the country.
Councillor Parker, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I have some questions around 3.7, which is on page 154. And I'd really just try to glean some clarification, and if I take them just point by point. It makes it quite clear here that there's a subcommittee that's set up of independent members, and that's members, not independent members and persons, of which we've got, so it's a subcommittee of 3, of which currently we've got 4 independent members. Now, bearing in mind that the requirement for a councillor to seek dispensation has to be made within 15 days of an event, I would ask the officer whether they might consider that hoping to achieve 3 persons out of 4 to be available might need perhaps some extra persons. So otherwise there's potential that the subcommittee could not be formed in time. I'm not quite yet fully understanding where the paragraph continues to say that the independent members will determine the dispensation applications and will make recommendations. So in effect they're a sort of a first vetting, as I see it, but the monitoring officer makes the decision. And I think that I'm writing, that's my conclusion, that's correct. What I want to ask is, we have these independent members who it's been made clear that they're a carry forward from our old standards committee. I want to ask what process of continued vetting and monitoring of their eligibility is currently carried out. I'll leave that one for an answer.
Okay, so dealing with the issues that you've raised, in terms of the extra persons, I hope that won't be required, just because I know the individuals concerned, and hopefully with 3, because we've got 4, so we have got 1 extra one, that should be sufficient, but I think it's something I obviously will review in 6 months' time. Also, it should be noticed in terms of individual dispensation applications, we haven't received any, so it's not as though we're going to be reconvening subcommittees every month. In terms of your second point, you are correct, and this is a legal point that follows the same lines of the Code of Conduct. The Code of Conduct is exactly the same, but the way that the procedure is worded, I'll take you to paragraph 13, it says the monitoring officer will then give effect to the recommendation. So it gives the monitoring officer little discretion to vary in any way. It's purely a legal point. As a statutory appointed officer, they need to give effect to the decision, so it's not as though they could reverse it or change it. Sorry. Third one, in terms of the independent members and process of eligibility, they were appointed on a rolling programme, so some expire in June 2014, then June 2015 and so on. I meet, I think it's every other month as part of the standards review meeting. As part of that process, I'm given training on the Code of Conduct, the arrangements. They've been involved in this review process, but we don't sort of continue review eligibility of that. We're in constant contact with them, but we don't sit them down and say, right, do you tick these boxes or anything of that nature.
Well, on that point, Chair, can I just then make a point that councillors are required to make annual declarations with regard to certain aspects of their interests and connections, and with regard to other factors that may ensure that they continue to comply to remain a councillor. I would like to see that a similar process is adopted to these individuals.
So I should have said sorry and I didn't. The independent members have decided that they want to complete registered members' interest forms to show that they're complying with the spirit of the code and the arrangements that they've enforced. So we have completed registered members' interest forms from those independent members, and obviously I take on board your comments and I will review their eligibility as we progress.
Hopefully, rather than it being a voluntary request by those members, it should be something that this council's leading on, and it should then become a requirement.
I take on board your point. I think all the members, it's not an issue. All the members are happy to do it, and actually the members inform me that other authorities won't let them do that, even though they want to do it. So I don't think it's an issue, Councillor Parker, but we'll ensure that they all completed.
Well, it's an issue for me, Chair.
I think it seemed to get sufficient nods around the room to suggest that if we could make it more of a process or a requirement rather than an option, that would help. Yep. Okay. I've got Councillor Leek next.
My only concern related to this 15 days notice, because how do you know that you wish to apply for dispensation when you haven't got the agenda? And in this particular case, we only got the agenda, in my case, last Thursday. That 15 days seems to be an unreasonable period. You've got to know what it is that you seek dispensation from, I would have thought.
I do take on board your comments, but I had to try and encourage members to make their applications promptly to ensure that they can be determined within the time frame. But I do take on board your points that there are circumstances where you may not know until you get a copy of the agenda and papers before you. That isn't to say that you're excluded from making that request, but in order to make this a workable procedure and ensure that you get your dispensation, that notice is going to allow me to definitely do that for you.
Would it be possible, therefore, to amend the words, but only in exceptional circumstances, and for Councillor Keating, page 159, right at the top? Because I think applications may be accepted in a shorter period when the agenda, after the members realise what's on the agenda or something. I mean, it's just unreasonable to be applying for dispensation when you don't know whether you need it.
I'm happy to leave it as applications may be accepted in a shorter period, full stop. I'm going to be honest, the only reason I put in exceptional circumstances is obviously I need to encourage members so I can get them their dispensations in time for their meetings. But if that is agreed by all members, I'm happy to just put a full stop at shorter period.
Councillor no. Councillor Mitchin.
Has the farcical thing that overtook all the parishes and this council at the end of last year disappeared, where we all had to give ourselves the dispensation because we were discussing council tax? If that hasn't disappeared, this process looks as if it's going to be rather heavyweight, because we'll all have to fill in the form, they'll have to solemnly meet. I mean, I think last time we pre-agreed it, and then we all signed afterwards. Because it's such a silly thing. It got in by ministers not understanding what they're signing for in the usual way.
In terms of that issue, basically what you've got is solicitors and lawyers in disagreement with central government, and there's been a lot of publicity and criticism of monitoring officers on this point. Basically, monitoring officers have reviewed that the dispensation is required, the exemption that did exist is now gone, and if you read the code then the exemption is required. What Eric Pickles has done to get round this is, I believe it was a few days ago, he literally did it. There is a guidance note for members on relation to personal interest, and he's added in a section there that says dispensations are not required for council tax setting. So I think it's just a case of a flaw in the drafting of the legislation. The legal opinion is still the same, but the fact that we've now got this guidance may
Okay, members, I don't seem to have anyone else with their hand up or wishing to speak on this one. So, in summary there, we've got, again, in the order in which they were raised, we talked about the term of the dispensation and looked at 11.1, looked at whether or not that dispensation can be granted normally for the remainder of the term of office. And then adding in potentially a new 11.3, which was that no dispensation should extend beyond that term of office. So it was with the term, not the individual. We discussed whether independent members should be required to complete the register of members' interests and be subject to an annual check of their eligibility. And then in item 7 of Appendix 2, we agreed to delete only in exceptional circumstances at the end of that paragraph. I think that kind of does it. So, yes, Councillor Parker?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I didn't raise it at the time, but I would just ask that the consideration of monitoring and eligibility should also extend to independent persons.
Seems logical, unless we've got any reasons why not. No. Okay. So we're asked to recommend that the guidance and procedure are adopted, and I suppose we are suggesting that subject to the points you have raised this afternoon. Okay, thank you very much. Right. I was just going to say, we're at that point now where, I don't know about you guys, but I could certainly do with a 5-minute recess. Would that help? Yes, well, I had sown that seed with you earlier on, yes. So, if I give you a view of what I think, I know there's a lot of paper here. But actually, yes, the majority of it is really sort of guidance information in terms of what we've been handling. The only issue I would wish us to deal with this afternoon really is as a committee is to provide guidance to the 4 of us who've been trying to resolve this offline on this committee's behalf, which is essentially to look at no, good point. No, I can talk about what we're intending to do, and then we can, but good point for a reminder, thank you for that. All I would wish to do is look at the draft questions which are in the middle of the pink pages. And I have 2 particular points of principle I'd like to sort of to work out, because I think by and large we've done an awful lot of work and we've got quite a lot of progress in terms of consensus. There are 2 areas, one in terms of scope and another in terms of the nature of particular lines of question. If we could get some view within the committee about how we deal with those 2 issues with the guidance of officers, then I think that would give us enough of a steer to resolve the outstanding clarification questions. I would hope that that would take no more than an hour. And in reality, if it's going to take us beyond an hour, then I think we're unlikely to resolve it here, and we need to think about where else we might need to deal with this, because I'm keen that we are keeping this process moving forward, and we seem to have allowed ourselves to get a little bit stuck at the moment, and that's not through any, poor intent, literally because of the complexity and us trying to get through the different interpretations of what we're seeking to achieve here. So if I can suggest maybe a break until 1:45, and then we see where we are at past, and see how much ground we've taken at that point, and then take a further decision point at past as to whether or not we can move forward tonight. Okay, so quick break till 1:45. That would be the point when we can we do it when we come back, or because we then yes I do. I need to read the I can this is to discuss confidential papers as a previously public meeting, which is this. I'm agreeing with members that the meeting is now to become confidential while passing the following motion: that pursuant to section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the remainder of the meeting on the ground that public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing it, and therefore that exempt information is likely to be disclosed, as defined in the appropriate paragraphs of Schedule 12A of the Act. to explain that in order to discuss the papers, the webcast will be turned off, but turned back on once the discussion is over. So we'll turn the webcast back on in order to conclude the meeting. Ask members of the press or public to leave the room. And I will now ask you to close off the webcast, and we will have a 7 minutes recess. Oh, yes. Yes. Are you agreed, members?
Agreed.
Well done. Off you go. I need a break.
Take care. I'm going to leave.
Right.